It's a pleasure to have such a wealth of knowledge and participation for our event today. I really never thought that we would be here on this day, but here we are. It's finally here. It's been months in the making. And on the behalf of Arts Ahead, welcome to Centennial College's Story Arts Center and the Art of Collaborative Management Symposium. Collaboration and partnerships have become a regular commodity in the arts and culture sector. From engaging with communities to cross-sector partnerships, it seems collaboration appears in organizations of all sizes. But what makes these relationships work? Why don't they work? What can we do as arts managers to make these relationships mutually beneficial and sustainable? Over the last semester, we have had the great opportunity to meet arts managers of diverse backgrounds whom have inspired us to explore the topic of collaboration further in the theme of the art of collaborative management. We hope that today will provide you with a deeper understanding and be a space for creative exchange and to make new connections. I would like you all to know that this would not be possible if it were not for the immense support from our program coordinator, Shelley Crawford, whom you'll meet momentarily, Barry Waite, Story Arts Center's co-chair, Centennial College, our donors, sponsors, our participants, our speakers, and of course my colleagues at Arts Ahead, and our facilitators as well for our workshops and panels. They are fantastic. At Arts Ahead, we are a fantastic, not we, but they are a fantastic group of impressive emerging arts managers who are responsible for making this day possible. And I feel privileged to have spent this experience with them over the past few months. Prepare yourself to be challenged, excited, and inspired by the incredible guests that we have leading our workshops, panels, and keynotes, and also by your fellow participants. And before I hand it over to the Story Arts Center's co-chair, Dr. Chris Jackman, I would like to just outline some housekeeping. If you have any questions, please feel free to ask any of my colleagues from Arts Ahead or myself. We're wearing the purple name tags, just with the little purple bar at the bottom. And if anyone's in here, just please raise your hand. They're over there. There's a couple of us over there. We also have tea, coffee, and other refreshments in the hallway, and lunch will be held in the cafeteria on the first floor, and we will be able to direct you later on. And with the generosity of our donors, we have also an incredible silent auction that's happening near the entrance, and it has a ton of tickets to the hottest performances in Toronto, memberships to museums, artwork, literature, and even some delicious homemade pies. Washrooms are located directly down the hallway and to your left, both the men's and the women's. We will also be filming today's event for archival purposes, just letting everyone know. And please feel free to follow us or like us on Instagram or Twitter at CC Arts Ahead, and it's just on that wall over there. And programming coordinators, Melissa and Eve, will be presenting the gifts today, just so that you know who they are and you can put a name to the face. And our gifts were generously given to us by Kevin Sparkman Photography. I want to say once more on the behalf of Arts Ahead, welcome, and I hope you enjoy your day with us. And now, Dr. Chris Jackman.
Thank you very much, Jane. Good morning, my name is Christopher Jackman, and I am the Chair of Arts and Design at Centennial College's School of Communications, Media, and Design. First and foremost, thank you very much for making the trek here with the roads being what they are. It's always the weather, isn't it? You know, no matter how much you've prepared, it seems like there's one last turn of the screw to deal with on opening night or opening morning, as it were. And I think that this particular crowd feels that intimately. I'm sure that over the coffee break, we'll trade some war stories about massive ice storms, about miserable things happening to cast members, to the sound, to deliveries gone horribly awry, and partnerships disintegrating at the worst possible moment. A few inches of slush will seem relatively benign by then. So go ahead. You're at the Story Arts Center. Please tell your story. But there's something else that I want you to share too. And that's the vitality of your work. Because I ask you, why does Toronto need it? Why does the world need it? These events, these programs, the initiatives that you've been spearheading in spite of every minor hiccup or major crisis, And you don't need to recite the whole grant application, but make no mistake, the aesthetics, the ideas, the experiences you produce are the beating heart of our cultural industries. There's an art and a science of it, I think, negotiating that delicate balance between crisis management and vision. And you are on the front lines, all of you making it happen, wherever you may be in your own career trajectory. I'm speaking quite personally when I say thank you very much for that. I'm looking forward to the rich discussions that today will offer. As Jane said, we have an amazing brain trust in this room, people at various points in their careers representing a range of disciplines. I hope to hear from as many of you as I possibly can. For the time being, let me single out our distinguished panelists and thank them in advance for their generosity today. We appreciate your time and expertise. I would also like to highlight the outstanding work of our program coordinator, Shelley Crawford, whose own vision has been integral to the development and success of the arts management program. I hope I would not be premature in asking us to give her a round of applause. I would be remiss if I didn't also note the contributions of Barry Waite, our Chair of Communications and Media. He is unfortunately absent today with us in spirit, but has likewise nurtured this program from its inception all the way to today's event. If you get the chance, be sure to shake his hand and fill him in. And last but not least, Arts Ahead, our arts management cohort. You are brilliant and formidable. The Symposium's interest in collaborative management emerges clearly from your own top-flight capacity for collaborative engagement and personal investment. I consider you all to be a true credit to this college, and I'm glad your efforts have borne such illustrious fruit. So, on behalf of Centennial College, the School of Communications, Media, and Design, and our Dean, Nate Horowitz, I am pleased to welcome you all to the Story Arts Center. Thank you very much. I'm now pleased to turn it over to Shelley Crawford. Thank you.
Everyone's going to be in a love fest today. I just want you to know that right now. I'm so pleased to see so many familiar faces here, alumni from other arts management programs I've worked with, students and faculty from sister schools, colleagues, friends from the GTA. Our own faculty are here as well, helping out and supporting us, and so many new colleagues, which is really wonderful. And it's especially gratifying to be here today at one of the best attended symposia in the past 7 years. Get to know that first cohort of our new 8-month postgraduate arts management program. We're housed in this incredibly creative environment, and you can tell from Chris Jackman's talk that this is a great place to really foster creative thought. And we have immense support from senior administration and fellow faculty. It's a very collaborative environment. Our students bring immense knowledge from their diverse undergraduate backgrounds and experience in the arts community. And here in our program in arts management, they've studied all the basics: fundraising, marketing, financial management, technology, leadership, policy, ethics, arts education, community development, and have engaged fully with scores, and I mean that in all sincerity, scores of arts professionals in theaters, galleries, museums, auditoria, and in our classrooms over the past 6 months. Currently, they're in a mentoring relationship as part of the program, and in a few weeks, they start a field placement where they can really showcase their skills and knowledge. Today, it's with great pride that we share their event management capstone project, The Art of Collaborative Management. These 9 students have exhibited maturity beyond their years, resilience, organizational skills, fiscal responsibility, and creativity, not mutually exclusive, I assure you. And they still have a sense of humor. All of these are in demand in our sector. Jane, as the chair who spoke first, has demonstrated true leadership. She has such integrity and is a tireless worker, as are all of the team. Everyone's efforts over the past 5 months have resulted in a superb professional development program that will stimulate and enrich you from start to finish. And fingers crossed, they will, in fact, I hope, accrue a small surplus, which we seldom see these days, when the day is done. I'm really very proud to have been part of this team of emerging arts professionals. Please be receptive to the ideas presented and shared today We want your own thoughts and questions with our outstanding speakers and fellow delegates. Let's truly collaborate and enjoy a rewarding professional development day with one another. And when you're ready, hire these emerging arts managers. They're going to make a huge contribution to our industry, and this is just a taste of what they have to offer. And I'm going to remind you to bid frequently on that fabulous sound auction, but don't outbid me because I'm bidding on everything. Now it is my great privilege to introduce our morning keynote speaker, Noora. Noora is the Director of Corporate Donations for BMO Financial Group and is responsible for the overall management of corporate donations and community affairs for Canada and the United States. She also serves as Secretary to BMO's Corporate Donations Committee. To many of us in the sector, and I know you're out there, Noora is what we call a force. Okay? She's highly tuned into the arts community locally, nationally, and internationally, and serves on the board of MOCA and Necessary Angel Theatre Company. Noora has also received the Queen's Jubilee Award for voluntary service. She knows the arts, culture, and heritage sector as few corporate funders do, and that has earned her immense respect in our industry and engendered a bit of fear. You can't bluff your way through the integrity aspect of your artistic product, and you better have your financial and management house in order when you apply for funding. That said, BMO has been recognized by many respected sources for their philanthropic leadership, due in part to Noora's contribution as their eyes and ears on the ground. $56.8 million in donations to not-for-profit, charitable, and community-based groups in 2015 is proof they are making a big difference in the lives of many across these sectors. We're keen to hear you today, Noora, and take away the good counsel of someone who has demonstrated personal and professional commitment to the not-for-profit sector, and in particular the arts. I suspect there may be questions from the floor, and it's a real privilege to have you here in person today. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you very much. I don't mean to instill any fear because I'm hoping to be lots of Q&As at the end of the session. So, I want to thank Shelley, Jane, Eve, and Melissa for inviting me here this morning to speak at this conference. And I met a number of the students when they visited BMO last fall to visit. They had a tour of our art collection. And we had a bit of a Q&A session back then, and I have to tell you, it was an inspiring Friday afternoon to spend with all of you. To the graduating students here, I want to thank you for having the foresight to focus your education on an area of our economy that is vital in our lives, and that is growing. For too long, the arts have been viewed as nice, but not really important, a frill you pay attention to when times are good. The reality is far different, of course. The cultural industries are now one of the major sectors of Canada's economy. They are a growing player in the creative economy and a key driver of the country's innovation economy as well. The Conference Board of Canada estimated that the annual contribution of arts and culture industry is 7.4% of real GDP, accounting for 1.1 million jobs. As a gross total, that's more than our mining, forestry, and fisheries sector, plus the Canadian Armed Forces combined. And those figures, they're from 2007. In today's creative economy, think how much bigger they are. And it's precisely because the arts are big and growing that they need both sound management and young management. In other words, they need you. Excuse me. I haven't had enough caffeine yet. And it's today when the established global giants, like banks, are looking over their shoulders at someone who's created a new app in his or her garage, it's clear that innovation is driving everything in the world today. If you can innovate, you can survive and thrive. If you can't, you'll disappear. But if you can manage innovation, well, that's the best of all. And as arts managers, by definition, you are innovation managers. So what I want to talk to you about today isn't the need for innovation, but the realities of innovating. Not the fact that you need to find food, but how you're going to hunt for it. The answer is collaboration. There's an old saying, if you want to go fast, go alone, but if you want to go far, go together. So in order to innovate and survive in the arts, you're going to have to go together. You're going to work together with people who were strangers last week, with people who aren't even in the arts, like banks, with people who are sometimes your rivals, people who don't speak your language, and people on the other side of the world. Because innovation doesn't exist these days unless it's driven by collaboration. We see this pattern everywhere. In medicine, no one wins Nobel Prizes on their own anymore. The Google car is being developed on 4 continents. In the world of infrastructure, building bridges, hospitals, airports, and subways, none of this happens without public-private partnerships. Colleges and universities, whose silo used to be high and made of concrete, are now working together. Centennial partners with U of T and Ryerson. York University partners with Seneca. In fact, it's hard to find a college or university that doesn't collaborate with others. And for me, the most amazing thing about the new Star Wars was the length of credits at the end of the film. Hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people were involved in making the highest grossing movie of all time. One of the top 5 important business thinkers in the world lives in Toronto. Don Tapscott has written many best-selling books on the rise of collaboration as the driving force in the global economy. In 2006, that's 10 years ago, when Facebook was a toddler, Twitter was a newborn, and iPhones weren't even born yet, he wrote a book called Wickonomics, How Mass Collaboration Changes Everything. Let me just repeat one thing he wrote. I quote, "Collaboration is important not just because it's a better way to learn. The spirit of collaboration is penetrating every institution and all of our lives. So learning to collaborate is part of equipping yourself for effectiveness, problem solving, innovation, and lifelong learning in an ever-changing networked economy." End of quote. This begs two questions whose answers will come from you. How will the arts use collaboration to stay alive and grow? And how will you use collaboration to stay alive and grow in the arts, especially when Canada's economy is less than robust and is in the middle of its own seismic shift? One of my colleagues has these words pinned on her office wall. It's true. There is no creativity without constraints. What this says to me is when our economy is constrained, collaborate. When an arts group's budget, or a bank's budget for that matter, is constrained, collaborate. Because I believe strongly from my over 30 years of working with hundreds of arts organizations across Canada and the US, that will be more creative precisely because we can face more constraints. Let me give you a taste of what that means. I'm going to offer up 2 examples, mini case studies. The first is from a big and long established arts group. The second is from the opposite. Opera by far is the most expensive of all the performing arts to produce and attend. Opera companies everywhere are struggling to find new audiences, new revenue sources, new ways to survive. Some opera companies simply disappear, never to rise again. And that was the case in the 2008 economic downfall. I think in the first 6 months leading into 2009, at least 7 or 8 opera companies closed across the US. But a great exception to that is the Canadian Opera Company here in Toronto. It faces huge challenges, but it's now the 3rd largest producer of live opera in North America. Why? Because necessity is the mother of invention, because constraints have pushed it to collaborate in ways that were truly unthinkable a few years ago. They've also pushed us to collaborate in new ways as well. BMO's been a sponsor of the COC since it first began in 1950. And the creativity and collaboration that emerged from their own constraints has pushed us to become more creative in how we support them in their journey. The COC now regularly co-produces new productions with other opera companies. It also commissions new operas by star directors, singers, and designers. There are 2 impulses behind doing co-productions and creating new productions. The first is to introduce a new and younger generation of people to the joys of opera. The second is to put Canadian-produced opera on a bigger stage in terms of quality and renown. In this case, to help make the COC not just Canada's top opera company, but one of the world's top companies as well. This is where we come in now. Rather than sponsor one production or part of a season, we are helping to underwrite the cost of co-productions and new productions. As you can imagine, creating entirely new operas and doing them with other companies takes a whole new level of collaboration to succeed. This was especially true after the COC moved into their brand new home, the Four Seasons Centre, in 2006. They now had to furnish it, but first they had to open it. The COC had to make most of that opening to let the world know that it now had become one of the world's great opera houses and was a hotbed for some of the most interesting opera anywhere. So they asked us to underwrite their opening week in the next 4 months of new initiatives. We began by sponsoring the live broadcast of opening night at Nathan Phillips Square at City Hall, where hundreds of people had gathered to join an evening of live opera, free. We underwrote fundraising galas, free public tours of the new Opera House, which included mini concerts, and the monumental Ring Cycle, the first production performed at the Centre. I think one of the most interesting things we did was the acoustical testing, where we worked with a number of community groups across the city, and we invited a number of our clients at the bank to come and do the acoustical testing. And it was an evening where it was just magical because you got to hum, you got to sit in silence just to test the acoustics, and it was quite wonderful. And there was a whole new appreciation for the new Opera Centre grew out of that. We then began a program of funding the cost of staging their opera in the new centre. Not just the classics that every opera company shows, but new productions that existed only in the heads of their creators. And because all opera, favorite classics, and daring new directions is fiendishly expensive to put on, the COC had to wrap up its collaboration with other opera companies in order to cut their costs and their risk. That's why in 2011 we helped sponsor Love from Afar, a co-production with the English National Opera and Finland's Vlamsa Opera. A year later, we helped sponsor Tristan and Isolde, directed by Peter Sellers, the first performance of the Sonspine production in North America, which was a co-production with the Paris Opera. By 2014, COC's co-productions had reached epidemic levels. We helped bring Falstaff to Toronto. It was a co-production between the COC, the Royal Opera House Covent Garden, La Scala, the Metropolitan Opera, and the Dutch National Opera. Things calmed down a bit this past year with La Traviata, produced by the COC, the Houston Grand Opera, and the Lyric Opera of Chicago. But not for long. In the next 2 years, 5 of the COC's operas will be co-productions. The trend is rising across all the arts. Toronto's Film Festival, TIFF, regularly partners with other film festivals and institutes around the world, as does the National Ballet, the Stratford and Shaw Festivals, Soul Pepper Theatre, Canadian Stage, and on and on. In fact, it would be hard to find an arts group of any size that doesn't collaborate with other groups to bring new and improved works to the world. But what else is the COC doing in their hunt for new audiences? They're doing something far too few Canadian companies, let alone Canadian opera companies, do. They're exporting. Canada is a huge country with a small population. Our domestic market will always be limited. So it's hard to find new audiences here. It's harder still to reach economies of scale, learn best practices from elsewhere, and compete with the best in the world. And these days, when access to great performances is widely easier than before digital took over our lives, the race to top quality means that to survive in Canada, more and more you're going to have to be world caliber. Yet despite this, only 5% of Canadian companies who can export are exporting. And this at a time when our record low dollar makes that easier than ever. Canadian software companies, medical companies, food companies, and Canadian opera companies too. But many arts organizations don't have either the operating funds or the marketing savvy to engage in market development activities beyond their own city. And that's a perfect innovation challenge I offer up to you. How can you think and act in new ways that will open up new markets for your arts group beyond our borders? And how can you make their products available digitally so even an infinitesimal portion of the 2 billion people worldwide who on a smartphone can access it? Who do you collaborate with, and how to make these crucial things happen in the arts? The good news is it's possible. In March of last year, the Canadian Opera Company took its production of Jean Juan Semele by George Frederick Handel to the Brooklyn Academy of Music. This performance marked the second time the COC had performed at BAM, just the second time. The first time was in the early mid-90s when they took Robert Lepage's production of Bluebeard's Castle of Vartung to BAM to incredible reaction. It's what put Robert Lepage actually on the map with opera. We weren't the sponsor, but that doesn't matter. The lesson here is that the COC understands just how far it has to go to find new audiences. But all this begs the obvious question. How are we, the bank, and the COC, the opera company, making collaboration work? One thing that doesn't work is sending in a proposal once a year. Banks need to plan. Opera companies, where the time from idea to opening night can be years, need to plan. So it's important to do what keeps any relationship healthy and growing, to talk a lot. But while that's a necessary condition for any meaningful collaboration, it's not a sufficient condition. More and more these days, we end up sitting at a round table where the COC and other arts groups we support. We work together on ideas. Next year is Canada's 150th anniversary and BMO's 200th anniversary. How can the COC and the bank use that year-long occasion to reinforce the COC's eminence in Canada and growing reputation abroad? In fact, we started having conversations about 2017 and 2012. The COC is making collaboration work on a local scale and global one at the same time, but it's big enough with an annual budget of $42 million a year to do all this. Now let's go to a completely different world in terms of size and audience. The Art of Time Ensemble was created in 1998 by Toronto pianist Andrew Barashko. Its goal is to change the way you experience live music. So their concerts, now a regular series, bring together dance, classical, rock, jazz, musical theater, and more with artists like Brent Carver, Branford Marsalis, Peggy Baker, and Margaret Atwood. Their budget is still tiny. They perform in Toronto at the Harbourfront Centre and Kerner Hall. Last year, they embarked upon a 12-city tour of the U.S., and in January, they launched their Sgt. Pepper's Canada tour with Stephen Page at the 3,000-seat Sony Centre. We first heard about Andrew from a tip by a friend of mine at the Royal Conservatory who thought he was incredibly talented, and he is. We didn't support Andrew the first time he came to us. The reality is we turned down about 5 requests for every one we say yes to. But we funded him in year 2, knowing that even staying alive financially between year 1 and year 2 is incredibly challenging for most small arts groups. In fact, BMO was Art of Time's first corporate supporter, and we're pleased to plunge today that other companies support it to a greater degree than we do. He was able to leverage our original investment. Why did we say yes to Art of Time? We love the way he thought outside the box and turned traditional art forms like dance, music, literature, and theater on their heads by smudging them all together. In other words, Andrew did something very few artists are capable of. He asked, he ordered that a bunch of very different art forms collaborate amongst themselves. If you haven't seen what happens when that happens, I urge you to catch their interpretation of the work of Frank Zappa later this month at the Harbourfront Centre. And next month, it's Hawksley Workman, who blurs lines between rock music, cabaret, and theater with the music of another Canadian icon, Bruce Cockburn. I chose to highlight the Art of Time in the Canadian Opera Company because they reveal just how collaboration on stage and off can work to everyone's benefit. From these 2 examples, you can take away one golden rule. Be willing to entertain every idea about connecting with other people, no matter how crazy it sounds. In fact, create a time and space each week or month devoted entirely to blue-skying new ideas for working together. Also, find out what organizations like yours far, far away are doing. Get in touch with them. If you're looking for funding, don't just approach the usual suspects like banks. We have to say no far more often than we can say yes. There are all kinds of companies and people out there who have needs that your organization can meet. The same goes for audiences, producing partners and venues, and remember, in those blue sky sessions, there are no bad ideas. Starting today, you will no longer be students of arts management. You will be arts management professionals. That shift in your own life is huge. You are entering a field that is in the midst of its huge shifts, on stage, backstage, online, everywhere. Today, there are billions more who are becoming arts consumers. Half the adult population of the world now owns a smartphone. Just 5 years from now, 80% will. Huge technological changes flooding the world with billions of people who are eager for cultural entertainment and able to get it either at the new concert hall down the street or on their iPhones. But no matter how unpredictable things get, the show will go on because arts professionals everywhere will be there where they've always had to be in order to survive, at the vanguard of innovation. And today, that means learning and perfecting the art of collaboration. You're graduating today with all the qualifications to be an arts manager. You may not think of yourself as being part of a rare breed, but you are, because you bridge two of the most meaningful things in all of our lives. As the British economist E.F. Schumacher once said, and I quote, "Nature and culture are the two great garments of human life. Business and technology are the two great tools that can and should serve them." Thank you, and I wish all of you the best of luck in your new careers.
Don't go far,
Okay.
Nada. Let me just grab this mic for 1 second. I'm thinking that maybe a few people might have come, Nada was a draw. We were very, very pleased to have her here today. And so let's make our most of the time with Nada. And I hope that you have some questions, some comments, some reflections on your own take on this very, very interesting perspective and the case studies, or bring your own situation into it. So are there some questions that some of you might have? It's always hard in the beginning.
You mentioned art of time approach multiple times. So, and over what period of time was that, and what was their approach? What was the approach that they to BMO?
Mm-hmm. Andrew Barasher came to see me before he had sort of started to experiment with what he was doing, and he was ready to take it live. He came to me towards the end of our fiscal year, and I just didn't have the budget left for it. I knew he was talented. I knew he was onto something. And he came to see me. He had done some more of his homework. I would send him back and to do some more planning. And he came back to me the spring of that year for the following season in the fall, and we agreed to support him for that. But we worked with him on putting his plan together as well. So that's part of the collaboration. But he was extremely talented in doing something new.
I have one.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right, I have to read it because it's a little bit long. So when you at BMO are looking at funding that has a collaborative nature to it, and innovative perspective, obviously, and that's important in any of the arts, of course, how persuasive can one be when it is really a new vision with other partners? How do you get that communication across about your true belief in working together and creating something that is totally fresh and new from what you may have traditionally been doing? And I'm just going to add a few more little bits on the end there. Doesn't that make the application process that much more complex? And my last point that I just would like to bring up afterwards is, does the cachet of an international partnership sway BMO's decision in any way? So there's a whole bunch of stuff packed in that.
That's a multi-pronged question. Chris Lorway is sitting at the back of the room with Roy Thompson Hall, so I'm going to talk about international collaboration at the end. We work very closely with him. I have to tell you, when you're working on these kinds of things and doing new things, it's not the bank's agenda. It's really on the agenda of the arts organization. What are we going to do? What can we fund that's going to move you ahead? Where do you want to be in the next 5 to 10 years? With the Canadian Opera Company, it was great. I mean, they were doing a lot of great productions over the years, don't get me wrong, but they now had this new opera house where they were selling, you know, the orchestra tickets are going for what, $285? That's a lot of money. They had to draw international singers if they were going to be on a world stage and do some new co-productions that would really put their mark on the world scene of opera. So it was really working with their agenda and how we could come in and do something different. I wasn't interested in funding La Boheme again or, you know, Madame Butterfly. We wanted to do new works. So that's really, it was to help them move their agenda forward. But also from our agenda, it's investing in something new, but also, you know, when we look at doing opera, the benefits of opera is also a lot of things, the benefits of our client entertainment. And it was the ability to give the client something new here in Toronto and meet new artists. So that was another thing, but it's really about moving their agenda forward. It's not about the bank's agenda so much, it's about, that's the collaboration. It's you sit down and you have that conversation. Where is our money going to move you? Where's the investment going to move you forward? And that's how I approach it with most arts organizations. So it's not so much on our agenda. International. I think international is important because I think as Toronto as world-class as it thinks it is, it's not. And I think in some arts groups we've become too insular about the Canadian identity, which is good because we have enormous talent here, but I also think we have to look outside for what's going on in the world and trends and see what's going on. I mean, theater in, you know, Berlin or Eastern Europe, you have to be in tune to that, what's going on, and even, you know, in the visual arts world, what's going on in China, and even Asia, Southeast Asia, it's quite amazing. It's why we collaborated with Roy Thompson Hall as part of our 200th anniversary to bring the last tour of Simon Rattle and the Berlin Philharmonic. He hasn't been here in years. And I think Torontonians and Canadians deserve that kind of audience. It's the same kind of, next Sunday, we're sponsoring Dmitry Vorostovsky in concert at Kerner Hall. He rarely comes here. He'll go to Carnegie Hall. It's an hour away, but he doesn't come to Toronto. And I'm glad to say that's been sold out. But I still think we need to see international art in this city. It also allows us to, I think a lot of arts organizations, we can draw from that.
Welcome, ladies and gentlemen. A couple of quick announcements before we start the first panel for this morning. Shelley has asked me to remind you that for the silent auction, or the tables that are, the items that are on the table, cash, always good, check, and credit card, yes? I'd also like to make a pitch when you have the time at a break or at lunchtime, is directly behind me is Centennial College's gallery, and there is a fabulous exhibition on in there right now by an artist who is a recent grad of the Fine Arts Studio program. Her name is Jean Fode, and it's quite timely. It has a lot to do with dislocation of peoples, think Syria, but think anybody else who's been displaced from a war-torn or economic migrant, and it's deceptively disarming. So I encourage you to take a look when you have a chance. My name is David McClimate, and you didn't come here to hear me. I've been asked to be the moderator to stop these three lovely people from getting into a bun fight, and I think I can probably manage that. I am the coordinator of the Fine Arts Studio program here at Centennial College, and you are sitting in my living room. So I want you to play nice. And I would also say, just by way of congratulations to Jane and her team, the studios, these are two studios that have been opened up where painting, ceramics, drawing, setting things on fire, whatever goes on in the Fine Arts Studio program happens. And our slogan is well-deserved. It's get your hands dirty. And this is as clean as this place has ever looked. So congratulations. And just by way of the get your hands dirty thing, our rule is, folks, that A friend doesn't let another friend leave these rooms with stuff on their face, so, you know, check each other. Yeah, so I'm an artist, a visual artist, currently the coordinator of the Fine Arts Studio program, but in terms of my relevance to this event this morning, I worked for 20 years as the Senior Project Officer for Visual Arts Ontario, so I'm well acquainted with the wherefores and whys of arts management. And I guess as a visual artist team, my tribe, the visual arts tribe, is notorious for being atavistic, self-centered, and jealously individualistic. We're notorious for not playing nice, not even with each other, but with other groups. Like you think of collaborative projects or group work in the fine arts, and you think bloodbath. And having said that, and I know that's our reputation, I would have to say, folks, that some of the most exciting creative projects that I've been involved, first of all, as a creative artist and also as an arts management administrator, has been through collaboration. So it is a very important process. A little more prickly, perhaps, in the visual arts disciplines than in theater or music, but that's not for me to go on about. I'll leave that to our speakers to address. So this morning's panel, the dynamic of pros and cons of partnerships and co-productions. We have, and I think a lot of you will recognize the people here at the front, we have three representatives of three levels of government, all experienced in facilitating partnerships as part of their job description, and as I read their bios, they also have it as part of their individual creative soul. So they come by their experience and their expertise to be here at the front of the room quite naturally. And what I'm going to do is I'll briefly introduce you to them. I'm going to ask them to introduce themselves. I think in terms of process, we've already figured out a speaking order. We'll let each speaker say what they would like. I would ask you folks to maybe respond to each other, and then we'll turn it open to the floor, because I think the most important dynamic will be the give and take from answers from the floor. So sitting immediately to my left, Chris Rosati. Chris, wave. Yep. He's from the Regional Services Branch of the province. Sitting next to him is Noora Sagarwala, Touring and Audience Development Officer from the Ontario Arts Council. And at the far end, last but not least, Timea Wharton-Suri, who is the Program Officer of Dance in Literary Arts from the Toronto Arts Council. Now, we all arm wrestled, and we decided that Timea was going to go first. Now, see, normally when I do this with my own students, I have a big rubber mallet, and I figured I wouldn't do that. But I'm going to put you on a timer, young lady.
Okay.
Give you 10 minutes, and then I'll give you the yank. Take it away,
Okay,
please.
thank you. Can everyone hear me at the back? Yes? Okay. So as you mentioned, I'm Timea Wharton-Suri, and I'm a program officer at Toronto Arts Council. I have a background as a performer in dance, working with various companies in Toronto and in the Caribbean. And I did my Arts and Media MBA at Schulich School of Business as well. And I've worked with nonprofit arts and also in the for-profit sector as well before I came to Toronto Arts Council. So partnerships of various kinds have always been something that I've done. And the view I'm going to take today, though, since many of you are sort of the next wave of arts management leaders coming out, is to go over some of the things I've learned as a program officer at Toronto Arts Council from the many, many partnership applications we receive from small, medium, and large organizations, and some of the pitfalls, the pros and cons that have come up from those. And really, some of it might seem obvious, but given the applications we receive, it's something that's really important to go over before you start embarking on these partnerships. So, we have a program called Open Door at Toronto Arts Council. Of course, in our discipline programs, theater, dance, music, whatever, we receive a lot of co-production applications. I'm going to talk more about the experiences through Open Door because this is a program for bigger ideas where it might be a small organization partnering with a much larger one, or two large ones coming together, or two small ones coming together on projects that are really meant to expand the reach of their programming beyond just the two organizations, but out into the sector at large. And this program is adjudicated by different juries each time, but there's a lot of similarities that pop up as we're going through. So going over the big general questions, the who, what, when, where, why, and how. So some of those are a little bit obvious. The when, the where, and the how of whatever you're proposing, that's going to come through discussions of what you want to achieve with the project. You'd be surprised, though, at how many applications come in without the when, the where, and the how actually outlined yet. So they have this big idea and they push it forward and say, here are the two organizations, here's what we want to do in a very general sense, no detail on those things. If you're not at that place yet, don't bother with the application. Don't bother coming forward yet. Even if you think you can squeak it through because it's, a deadline's coming up and you want it to go with something in your season, something like that, it's really more worth it to step back and take more time to develop the answers there. But I'm going to go over the why and the who and the what a little bit more, because those are the questions that should really be answered before you even agree to partner with another organization. So I'm going to start with the who, and this might seem really obvious, as I said, but partnerships and collaborations in the arts are just like any other type of partnership, particularly a marriage or a romantic relationship. So you want to look at who, but not just the other person. So who is this person I'm getting into a relationship with? Of course you want to examine that before you get into the partnership. But more importantly, look at it introspectively. Who are we as an organization? What are our values? What's our mission? Where are we now? And where do we want to go in the future? Because this collaboration might sound like a great idea. Maybe you were at a cocktail party, it came up, or maybe you were at a conference and it came up. But will that partnership fulfill our mandate, who we are? Is it in line with who we are? Or where we want to go in the future? So that's really important to examine first. And I'll tell you that the juries on these at the funders are going to ask that question. They're going to ask, who are these two partners? Vision, mandate, where are they now? Where do they want to go in future? And does this partnership proposal match those things? Is it in line with those things? And you'd be surprised that deeper level of thinking hasn't come through for some groups, even though the idea might seem really great and obvious. Like, of course we'd want to do this, but it could take you off course. So the pros, of course, of partnerships involve resource pooling. We're going to get together, we're going to expand access to different audiences. We might add more diversity to our programming. We might bring more long-term stability to both organizations, expand our donor reach, anything like that. It's about pooling resources when you're coming together. But when you pool resources, of course, different things can happen. And just like in a relationship, you can be pulled way off course from your mandate or your vision, depending on the size or impact of the project. So it might be a great thing to do as a one-off, but your supporters, your donors, maybe even the funders, your audience members might start to question how this fit in with your mandate and where you're going. So you really have to examine that. Who are we? Who are they? Before you start. So that's the who. And then, of course, there's the why. Again, might seem obvious. We want to expand. We want to reach new audiences. We want to bring in more diverse programming, whatever it is. That, again, is the more of the surface level. But go a bit deeper, because you want to ask your organization, yourselves, why do we really want to partner here beyond this one project? It might be a great idea to expand our space, but is this the right organization to partner with to expand it? Really go into the whys for yourselves and then for your partner as well. Because the partner organization might have a very different idea. I'm going to give an example of this a bit later toward the end of my 10 minutes before I get belled. But it's coming. But you really want to examine that on a much deeper level, besides the obvious, we'll have more resources if we do this, because you need to question your motives and theirs as well. And again, the assessment juries and the funders are going to do the very same thing, so you may as well do it first. And then again, you go through those other questions of the when, the where, and the how, and that's all great. And you've decided who you are and where you want to go, and why you're doing this. But then there's the what. What, meaning what are you bringing to the table? It's wonderful if we're getting into a relationship and I say, oh, Noora, what are you going to do for me? But what am I going to do for Noora? What am I bringing to the table? So the assessment committees are going to look at what is each group bringing to the table? Is it an equal partnership? And just like in a romantic relationship, it's okay if one group, let's say, brings more financial resources and the other brings more, let's say, they're doing more of the groundwork, they have a larger network, they have access to a different audience. That's fine, but just like with a romantic partnership, you have to discuss that beforehand and make sure both parties are okay with that. Because let's say one party's bringing in financial resources. A con to this partnership would be, what if their funding gets cut? What if they had a weak season, lost audience members? Then have you discussed what's going to happen with your partnership? Is the other group going to try to bring in more resources? What are your contingency plans? So it all leads to that sort of thinking when you start with what are we bringing to the table? What is the other group bringing to the table? When they can't bring it, or if they can't bring it, can this still go forward? And again, the funders are going to look for those strong contingency plans, and that each group is benefiting. Not one group, the bigger group may be having this big advantage, and the smaller group just saying, yay, I'm excited just to be able to work with this larger group. But that smaller group really has to be able to benefit as well. And funders, even other supporters, you may have your board members, others are going to ask these questions. So really important to ask them before you even agree to get into this partnership. We see a lot from the funder side where they've agreed to do it and then they start thinking of these things afterward because it sounded like such a great creative idea. But you really need to do it before you agree to that partnership or that marriage. Do I have a couple of minutes left?
1 minute.
Okay, so I'll try to go for a quick example. There could be, let's say, a large art gallery that is putting in a proposal to partner with a very grassroots theater organization that focuses on LGBTQ social issues. And I'll be really fast. I didn't hear it at all. And they're going to partner on some performance art exhibitions. And this gallery, for instance, hasn't ever done live art before, hasn't presented live art before. And this small grassroots theater organization has never worked in such a large space with a lot of audience members. So it might sound like, what a great thing. The gallery can increase its maybe younger audience members, more diverse audience members, get its programming sort of out of a rut. But if let's say this art gallery has a very conservative, older donor base that might start to question, well, what are their values and goals here? Is this in line with what I want to support? The gallery will have to think about that. The smaller grassroots organization might sound like a great opportunity. I have access to space and they have a marketing machine and they'll do all this stuff. But if you're a grassroots organization, your supporters might start to question, is this in line with their values? Partnering with this big sort of, older, maybe dinosaur organization, it looks like a dinosaur to that group. But they might start to question your values as well. And that's okay, you're not gonna please everybody, but you have to think of all of those things before you just jump into bed together.
Thank you.
You're welcome, yeah.
Do you want to comment at all on what Timea just said? Or just go for it?
Well, I think the story that I'm going to tell is exactly that dinosaur meets grassroots organization kind of scenario. So I think it kind of follows almost perfectly from what Timea said.
Right.
Yeah.
I just agree with everything she said.
Perfect. I think we're just going to have a sound check here. Yes.
Oh, sure, the battery's dead. Oh,
Thanks.
okay.
Yeah,
But
do you want me to
yours-
dive right
Go
in?
for it.
So before I was a funder, in my life pre-funder, I've only been at the Ontario Arts Council for just over a year. And before that, I was a festival presenter producer, mainly in the performing arts, and I did that for 14 years. So the collaboration story I'm going to tell you is from my early days as an arts manager. I was working at the Canada Dance Festival, which is sort of the premier showcase of contemporary dance. It's housed at the National Arts Centre, and it's funded by all levels of government, and it's existed for, at the time, I think it was 36 years. So, you know, I was part of this sort of larger infrastructure, and we were going through a bit of a soul-searching process. So we were going through a strategic planning process. We actually have a very small staff. While we're sort of housed in this larger infrastructure of the National Arts Centre in Ottawa, our staff was 3 people. It was a general manager, an artistic director, and myself, the company manager. And this was my first real gig as an arts manager. I had done sort of smaller, like box office, front of house, you know, tiny things, you know, summer contracts at festivals and stuff, but I'd never actually been the company manager. So as we went into the strategic planning process, I wasn't even entirely clear on what it was we were trying to do, but I participated and, you know, gave my input. And we were a biennial event, so once every 2 years. So the even-numbered years, we had a big showcase festival, you know, 150 artists that we were showing on multiple stages all over Ottawa, including at the NAC. And in the off year, we were Deadsville. We were quiet. And so during the strat planning process, we decided that during the off year, we needed to be present. And it was an opportunity for us to experiment and to do projects that were a little bit outside of our wheelhouse. So we dove right in. 2007, we said, we are going to do an off-year event. My artistic director, Brian Webb, who some of you might know, runs the Brian Webb Dance Company in Edmonton, came to me and said, Noora, I wanna host a breakdance battle. And the Canada Dance Festival does contemporary Canadian dance. It's like contemporary ballet, you know, Toronto Dance Theatre, Mary Chouinard, Kid Pivot, if you sort of get a sense of what that work looks like. And then over here, Brian says breakdance battle. And so the company manager in me starts sort of going through a series of questions. Oh, Brian, who are you going to invite to this breakdance battle? And who's going to judge this breakdance battle? And have you ever been to a breakdance battle? And it very quickly became clear that he had a seed of an idea. It was an interesting idea, but we hadn't, there was a lot to think through and figure out. And he didn't have a network into the breakdance. And I'm not even using that. For those who are breakdancers, I apologize, that's not even the proper term, B-boys. So if for the B-boys and B-girls in the room, like even just saying breakdance battle is just such a faux pas. So then, and I happened to be in my 20s at the time, going out on the weekends. I had a very lively nightlife to go with my, my day life as arts manager, nightlife as club kid. And so I knew DJs and MCs and B-boys and B-girls. And so I started to reach out into my network. And I set up a meeting with Sabra Ripley, who is B-girl Sabretooth of the Decipher crew, and by day, working for a parliamentarian. And I took Brian with me to Parliament Hill, and we had a meeting about this idea. And very quickly, it became clear that breakdance battles happen all the time. They happen every weekend. B-boys load up in a car, they drive out somewhere, they do a battle, hopefully they come home with $1,000. Probably they spend $300 to register and leave with nothing other than the experience of having participated. So it became clear that a breakdance battle was not what was needed by this particular community, and particularly not one that was hosted by the Canada Dance Festival. And really, what was valuable about the Canada Dance Festival was that we had this national platform. We had the NAC as a venue partner. We had support from various levels of government, so we were recognized. We were part of that mainstream dance community that was supported by public policy, by audiences. And so we had an opportunity to take what was really a marginalized dance form and to provide it that national platform. And so we decided instead, and this was this was the first conversation, but there were sort of a series of conversations afterwards, where this idea evolved into kind of a b-boy convergence or a summit. So we were going to get b-boys and b-girls from across the country together, and we were going to put them together for 5 days of knowledge panels, workshops. You know, they were going to learn from each other. They were going to teach kids in the community, and they were going to perform on the NAC stages. And on the last day, they were going to battle. So it was sort of this huge love fest leading to the battle. And the battle, we partnered with a group called House of Paint, which is this outdoor festival in Ottawa, which is all about graffiti and sort of 4 elements. So it evolved over time, but it didn't evolve on its own. So Brian and Ellen are at the time they were in their 50s, and they, very much outside of this subculture. I was the, 20-some-odd-year, woman of color who was clubbing at night. So I was I think the obvious pick to sort of go into the community. And I was actively seeking out clubs where breakdancing was happening, b-boying was happening. I was watching videos. I was trying to become a bit of a sponge and absorb as much as I could. And whenever I would meet b-boys, I would give them my card and tell them our plans. And they would look at me in a very skeptical kind of way, like, so you want to give this event to us? And you have nothing to do with this event. This is a very top-down kind of model. And so very quickly it became clear that in order to do this authentically, we needed real b-boys and real b-girls buying into this idea and shaping this idea. And so I became connected with the Canadian Floor Masters, which is the oldest b-boy crew in Canada. And they also have a 50-year-old man at the top of that crew. His name is Buddha. And so we brought Buddha in, and Crazy Smooth, who you might know, now runs a company called B-Boyism. Crazy Smooth and Benjamin and Lil Bear, and they all have real names too, but they have B-boy, B-girl names. And we brought them in, and we set up an advisory committee, and we worked with them over a series of months to sort of shape this idea. And there was a lot of skepticism at first, where they were like, you're just using us for the commercial appeal of b-boying, because that's what people often do, right? You throw a bit of b-boying in a music video and you make it cool, right? Make something that's not cool, make this dinosaur that's not cool, cool. And that wasn't our intention. And so it took a long time to convince them of that, to build trust. It was set up as an advisory committee, though. So Brian, the artistic director, always had the final say on anything. And so there were a number of sort of contentious issues that cropped up, around who was the headliner of this event. Brian went with Rubber Band Dance from Montreal, and they combined b-boying with contemporary dance. And Brian saw that as a bridging piece between our festival and Hip Hop 360, which is what it ended up being called. But Buddha was horrified by this. Buddha is all about foundation, right? It's about like the original OGs, the real authentic b-boying, and you're taking this thing that's this watered down form of b-boying and then making it the headliner. And that was a huge issue that exploded in many different ways. There was also, even something like the logo or the name of the event, or what scope of dance are we looking at? Is it just b-boying, or is it going to include locking and house and whacking? And you're sort of opening yourself up to we didn't even so going in, we didn't know that that's what we were contending with. And so all of these issues were raised as we went along, and we would have to make choices together, collectively, to shape this event. On our side, we were the infrastructure. So I was doing all of the logistics. So I reached out to all the b-boy crews that were selected, and I would call them up and try to explain the event to them, and I would tell them, yeah, you're going to do this, you're going to do workshops, you're going to do panels, and the fee is I'll make up a number now, like $3,000. And the crew would be like, we can't afford that. And I would be like, no, we're paying you this fee. Because in their world, you pay to play. And in our world, we pay professional artists to perform. And we were like, no, 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 we'll travel you out here. We will put you up in a hotel and we will pay you a fee. And they were like, oh yeah, no, we're there. So yeah. So, well, it was just a totally different paradigm. So, I mean, I think what I'm trying to say, the event was a huge success. 67% of people who attended the event had never heard of the Canada Dance Festival before. 37% had never been to the National Arts Centre before. The demographics of the people we saw were completely different. There were men on stage at an event where we always had women on stage. There were men in the audiences. Men were dancing, men were enjoying dance. It was a paradigm shift. So I would say the lessons learned, I think, around collaboration with this particular project is, or what I've learned is, collaboration is about relationships. So all those pitfalls, you know, when we talk about pros and cons, the pitfalls of relationships exist in collaboration. You know, people can let you down. People can become disengaged. People can get frustrated with the process or feel powerless. You know, if you're in a decision-making process that goes forever and there's sort of death by committee, you will lose people. So if you want to make them feel empowered, you want to make them feel engaged, you want to, and I'm going to say one more minute? 30 seconds. You don't want to rush into the process with a fixed idea of what it's going to look like, because then you don't allow for the benefits of collaboration to really come through. If we had done that, this would have just been a b-boy battle, and it wouldn't have been this much richer event that it eventually became. You have to become comfortable with the unknown then, because you're not controlling everything. You have to allow for emergence. But at the same time, you need to come to some kind of shared understanding, because the rules of team dynamics are also at play. So you're bringing resources to the table, but you also have to have a shared goal. And you all have to have a clear idea of what that is. And managing expectations can be done in part through contracting, but a lot of it is sort of determined in the room through a process of team dynamics. So I guess I'll leave it at that.
Great, thank you. Well, good morning, everyone. Esteemed panelist colleagues, nice to be up here with you. I want to thank you all for coming on the first day of winter. It's great that you're here. I appreciate, and I think we all appreciate the fact that you took the time to go through this terrible weather to be here today, because I think this, the symposium and this conversation, there's some fairly important conversations to be had around arts management and the future of arts management, because there's a lot of stuff going on in the field, in the sector, of which you'll be the custodians of, or already are the custodians of. So it's great that you're here. I want to thank Shelley and David and Melissa and Eve and the planning committee for the invitation to be here today. It's an honor, and it's a great privilege to be a part of this and to share whatever kind of wisdom I have to share. First off, I am not a dancer. I'm a really bad dancer. I have book dance, but we've got real diversity on the panel here. I work for the Ontario government, but my history is I started a festival, not-for-profit in Vancouver many years ago, ran it for a number of years. I evolved into a large event booker, so I've booked everything from the Vancouver Symphony to performance arts groups from Australia, to buskers from Britain and Spain, to April Wine, Dance Brazil. So I've booked visual arts exhibitions. I booked everything, and along the way have been involved in all manner of partnerships and collaborations. I'm coming from this morning from that as my context. As a funder, I have partnerships have been part of the funds that I have delivered and also not. So I have developed in my history as a funder, but also as a practitioner, my views on partnerships, which I love, but I think you have to go into them with your eyes wide open. I want to build on some of the things that were already brought forward by the panelists to try to give my take on it, not specifically as a specific experience, but how I approach them and what I've experienced in my time. So I love partnerships and collaborations, and I view them as two kinds of streams of thinking as an arts manager in this. One is the creative side, and the creative side can be as loose or as tight as the idea, as is appropriate to the idea. So I agree with what's been said here. So like you need to know, who it is that you're partnering with, and I'm going to get into that. So there's what's the creative garden you're trying to create for these two companies or these group of artists or whatever. What's the context? And you need to manage that. And as arts administrators, you have to manage this. And the second side, which in many ways you're really the custodian of, is the project manage of the logistical capacity side of this thing. I come from a belief that ideas are a dime a dozen. It's entirely in the execution. That's been my experience. I have botched brilliant ideas and have ideas that I was kind of cold on through really solid execution. Be great. So I can't emphasize enough, and I think as arts administrators, your job is to project manage this through. I use that term, you may not, and I'll elaborate on that a little bit, which is around the who's doing what, the logistical capacity of delivering this. And you need to, A, know who you're dealing with, and know them from their capacity to deliver perspective, and also write out or draft and look them in the eye and say, you're doing this, and I'm doing this. I wouldn't do a partnership myself now without some kind of terms of reference. The road is paved with partners who don't deliver. And when they don't deliver on you, it can bring your organization down. We're working with a project right now where a municipality bailed out on an organization. And could you find a more solid partner to deal with than a municipality? You can't. It's costing the other organization a great deal of money, time, effort, and reputation to try to work through this, and it just might die. The thing might die. That's the municipality might have a very good reason. It's not a judgment on that. But the lessons learned there is that you need to know your partner, what they are going to do, and articulate that. It can't be fuzzy. It needs to be tight. And that's why I use the term project manage it. Draft it, look them in the eye and say, you do this by Thursday, I do this. Or this is how we're going to do this. And the second stream of the creative collaboration should be referenced in that. So how are you going to create collaboratively? Because you're the representative of your organization, as I understand, or at least that's I understand that you are arts administrators more and less about practitioners. But even if you are, as a practitioner, if you're a visual artist or you're in a dance company, I think it behooves you, and I really wanted to use that word because it's so elevated.
Seems so
management. Behooves you to
we're going live. Eh?
Yeah, we are. Yes, yeah. Great. It behooves you to have a real clear understanding of what each partner is doing. And the terms in reference can be as simple or as elaborate as you think is going to give you comfort in going forward and one that gives your partner comfort. I would say this, and I don't know if you guys agree with me on this, but I would say I know for me, because of where I am at right now, if I were to say to a partner, I want to do terms of reference, I'll draft it, and they say no, I'd be very anxious. Yeah. I would,
Anxious as in you wouldn't go forward with it.
no, I wouldn't.
Yeah.
I wouldn't. And if they said, if they didn't say, okay, well, I'll do it then I would know I made the right decision, you know. Find somebody else. It's just in our best interest. I don't mind drafting it. It doesn't have to be elaborate, but it's something that you go, but it said right, you were going to do this by Thursday, right? And it's just the other thing too is that I believe that when you approach it that way, from what I'm calling a project management perspective, your partner knows they're dealing with somebody who's competent. And they won't take advantage of you, and they know that you're, and then by extension, whatever you are bringing forward to the government for funding or a foundation for funding, they know they're dealing with somebody who's competent and who's going to deliver on everything they would say. The important message for me here, and I learned this the hard way, because I was a crappy actor, improviser, comedian dork who ended up having to run this comedy festival because nobody else did, and I knew nothing. And for 6 years, 7 years, I faked it and made mistakes and was wishy-washy, and I learned quick that I had to change my flaky actor weirdo personality into somebody who was competent when he was sitting across the table with people. And when I was talking to sponsors, they knew they were talking to somebody who knew what he was going to do and was going to deliver. And if you can take care of that project management side, the vagaries of creativity can flow. And you're doing yourself and the artists that you're working the best favor to take care of all the logistics and the capacity so that you create a garden for them to go crazy. Right? If you're dealing with all the other stuff over here, then you have a little extra time to devote to the vagaries of creation. And visual artists have lots of experience with visual artists, and they're, they're lateral thinkers. And today's idea is, yeah, God bless them. And you're right. But you want to create a garden for them to be themselves. And today's idea may be tomorrow's, I don't like that, I'm going to do something. And change 12 different times. But if you've got the other side, the logistics together, then that can flourish and it won't derail you. So just in everything that they said, I'm just saying it completely differently or in my own way, which is, yes, know who you're dealing with, know their capacity. So there's the creative stream. What is their vision? What is their mandate? Who is their audience? That's all part of the creative stuff. And then the second part of it is, what's their surplus ratio? What is the capacity of this organization? What is their history with partnerships? And a good organization that you're going to partner with should be forthcoming with that. You don't have to go into their books, but you need to get your own level of comfort that they have the capacity to do what they say they're going to do, and they have a history of doing that. And if they don't offer that up or don't give you that comfort, then think twice about whether you're going to partner with them, because you're going to run into trouble, or you potentially could.
You're about to get belled.
I'm about to get belled. I really don't have anything else to say other than it's lovely to be here with you all. Thank you.
So, ladies and gentlemen, this is the most important part I've always found with any kind of panel discussion is for you to ask questions of the panel. But before we even get to that, do you guys want to ask each other questions or comments?
Comments, I think, yeah, I
Please.
agree with everything that was said. And in Noora's example, if they had come to a funder early on in the process, they likely would have been rejected because they hadn't yet worked through all of those issues of who's in power here? Who owns the work once it's done? Is a one-time festival something that is, what's the change that's going to come from that? Do they want to invest working with the B-Boy crew on a long-term basis? Like, all these questions would come up. So if they come to a funder too early or to a foundation or whomever, probably would have been rejected. But later on, obviously, in having a Noora on your side, you get someone trying to work out all those questions and answers and project manage. And then it becomes something that looks more viable to those on the outside. Because if those on the outside can't find the answers to those questions in your proposal, it's likely that one or both partners don't have the answers yet either.
Awesome point. Ownership of what's created is fundamental and should be sorted out very early in the process. That's a huge issue that people run into trouble with all the time. So do yourself a favor and sort that out early in the process. Who owns what?
Could I ask you all a question, and then I'll shut up? There's two parts to this. Do you have comments about the notion of small steps first? Like, in terms of, say somebody's new to the collaborative process. Do you come up with a massive, epic project, or you do something smaller or manageable, or is that not even a relevant question? And the second thing I'd ask about partnerships, we're talking about it as if they're equal partners. Now, invariably, there's dominant and minor partners. Can you comment on either of those aspects?
Yeah, with your second question about the more dominant partner, that comes up a lot, actually, and that's where the issues of ownership get mentioned. The issues of, or the questions around who's benefiting the most. It's fine, again, nothing's going to be perfectly equal. One group might benefit more than the other, but both have to be benefiting. It might look like, oh, the larger organization is doing all this work. They've got the networks, they've got the marketing capacity, they've got all of this going on, and the smaller group is just coming in to do their artistic work. But very often the smaller group can end up being drained.
Exactly.
They're really doing all the work because a larger organization says, well, you're going to benefit from our space. If you want to do this, that's fine, we'll do it, but you do all this, that, and the other.
That sort of goes back to what Chris was saying, though, about fundamentally what could be an exploitive situation when you're saying in terms of reference, so that you understand what everybody's role is.
But it is important to know that, most partnerships won't be perfectly equal, but whether you're on the side of the larger or the smaller, you have to make sure that you're getting what you need and that you can deliver and that they will deliver as well. So those terms of reference are really important there.
I just want to say, my view on that is that regardless of your size of your budget or the work or the profile of your organization, you are an equal player in this, even no matter what you're a player and you're a competent organization that's in there, and you are going to take care of your organization in this relationship. So another way of putting that is do not be passive in your relationship. Be active, be proactive, and be professional, regardless of who does what, and the size or the profile of your organization that you're partnering with. You're not a second banana, or don't ever consider yourself a second banana.
Yeah,
So
sorry, yeah.
I do. I'd like to really know, you've talked about individual experiences, you've talked quite a bit about, Toronto Arts Council and your perspective on how you might view. Where does the board come into it? And do you need a lawyer? Because you're now getting into copyright issues and all that other stuff.
Yeah, I wanted to ask this question too, because you're talking about executive director to executive director
and
at some
artistic
point.
director and
Where does the board come in?
Yeah, so from my perspective, so looking at what the funders or the juries would look at, which is what I was focusing on, it's very similar to any type of supporter of your organization. So that could be your board, volunteers, et cetera. They should be given the same consideration and the same amount of information before, because they have fiduciary responsibility to your organization. So if you're presenting them with this great idea, this great concept, but you haven't given them that in-depth analysis and here's where we are, here's where this group is, they might come at you, or hopefully come at you with the same questions that the funder will, and because they're the ones on the hook for this in a big way. So really, they should be your sort of that first step of consideration. So yeah, we've got executive director to executive director coming up with these great ideas. Now you've got to talk to your board, bring them, they have ideas, experience, knowledge, everything, including legal experience, which is very important once you get down to the nitty-gritty. But really your board should be that primary first go-to group before you even come to us. Yeah.
Can I take a stab at
go
that?
for it,
Yeah.
Chris.
My belief on that is that your board role remains the same, governance, fiduciary responsibility. There are parts of this that, depending on the relationship that you have with your board, I would argue, and I know that I wouldn't run a not-for-profit where I got it into with the board at the board level, maybe an individual board member because of expertise that they bring, but at the board level for them to start talking about the art, for them to start commenting on things that are day-to-day running of the organization. They have their role, and their role remains the same. You need to report this to them. You need to talk about your financial vulnerabilities and all that sort of stuff. But their role remains the same. And if it's the history of your organization to have them poking in on the kind of art that you do, then that's the culture that you've created there. Not one that I would like, but that's your business. But I would say that in this experience, the board role is the same as it always is.
Yeah, I'm going to chime in on this too. I mean, I think part of it is about what type of board do you have in your organization? So is this a policy and governance board, or is this a working board, and how involved are they in the day-to-day running of the organization? With Hip Hop 360, we had board buy-in at that when we did that sort of strategic planning process, and we agreed we would be doing a thematic event, and of course they were being updated along the way throughout the process as the event took shape. But there was that sort of critical moment when we got our granting results from all of the different levels of funding, and there was that moment where we had to decide: are we going forward with this or not? Does this idea get canned at this point, or are we going to fundraise to make up the difference, and or are we going to just say are we going to not do this and then just focus on the 2008 festival? Because it really became a question of is this event that's a bit of an experiment now threatening our established sort of flagship event, and that was a decision the board had to make but they listened to some advocacy from the advisory committee and myself, and we decided to go forward with it, and we were really glad that we did. But it's not, I wouldn't have felt comfortable doing running headlong into something that was a bit of an unknown.
So just to be clear, on what grounds was the board making the judgment?
Financial.
Financial.
Yeah, it was a financial risk. Yeah.
Other
That's
questions,
okay.
folks? We're way at the back there, please. You guys all hear that?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
So I think having a shared vocabulary is really valuable.
Yeah.
I spent a lot of time researching b-boying before sort of making these, starting these relationships, so that I would have some kind of baseline from which to speak, to these artists. I think also when you're talking to funders, though, you have to think about sort of the language that funders are using. So it's, and as the touring officer, I often get applications where they're like, oh yeah, we want to build our fan base. And I'm like, no, we're talking about audience development. So just reframing things. Yeah, we're going to have this party. It's like, well, actually that's a performance, right?
Yeah.
And then, we're just going to we're going to talk to people after the show. And it's like, actually, that's engagement. right?
Yeah.
You with me?
Yeah.
So partly it's, you know, you're saying the right things. It's just about maybe understanding the vocabulary that's being used in a specific context.
Yeah, agreed. Very strongly agreed, yeah.
I'll just add to that. You really need to know who you're talking to and what it is they're trying to hear, and what's the context of your conversation. So, like if you're talking to the funders, you need to make it your business to know what they want to hear, and if you don't, because sometimes you can't divine these things, you need to find that out, and then address whatever it is that you understand at an eyeball to eyeball level they're looking for, and then confirm that with them. Have you got it? Is that making sense to you? Am I? So you can confirm that the message that you're trying to get through to them has gotten through.
Chris,
Yeah.
that was a point I was going to ask you about, and I'm glad that you brought it up. So let's just step back from that. So all the people in the room, looking at three different levels of funding here, could someone call you up and say, hi, I'm not sure that I'm ready to go forward with this, but I really need to talk around it.
Yes.
Will you do that for people?
Absolutely, yeah, and it happens all the time, so don't feel shy about doing so, because as was mentioned, that your audience is going to change for when you're trying to pitch this idea. So to the funders, call them up, see if you have an officer or someone who will, you can talk to them about your idea. They will give you feedback, just as Noora said, about reframing some of the words you're using for your application. If you're going to be presenting to your board, it might be, again, a financial situation where they don't care about this sort of deep artistic intervention, or you don't necessarily want to talk to them about it, but give them more of a general overview, so your language there would be different. But definitely when it comes to funders, you can talk to us about that. Say, here's my idea. Does this fit with your program? How does it sound? And then we help you frame it.
Yeah, absolutely. I probably do like 6 of these calls a day. So typically, you want to go to the funder at the early stages of your project. So then you're sort of talking through that, so they can make sure it's actually a right fit for the program you're looking at. I would say, 60% of the time I'm saying, oh, that's actually not a touring project. That's a multi-arts project, and you should be looking at this particular stream of multi-arts. At that stage, then you can go and read the guidelines and application form, and once the idea has taken a bit more form, you can actually submit a draft version of your application, as long as it's a few weeks before the deadline, around deadline day, which is today and tomorrow for Timea and I. It gets a little bit hairy. But if you're doing it, well in advance, you can set up an in-person meeting. We can give you feedback on all of your answers. We can talk through your budget. Oh, you didn't pay any artist fees. That's really problematic.
Yeah.
So things like that. We'll show you your red flags, and then it gives you an opportunity to work on it sort of before actually submitting the project. And then of course we do feedback after. So if you're successful or not successful, you can contact the officer to get feedback, and you'll get the comments that were actually raised in the jury. Oh, there were questions about this licensing arrangement. You didn't really explain how that worked, or what have you. I feel that the officers are a resource to you that can be used, and I think the people who use them regularly are the ones that tend to improve their applications the most and will eventually be successful in the program.
Noora, the corollary to what you're saying then is, are you suggesting that, say somebody goes forward, does this, and ultimately they're not accepted? Given feedback and such, would you encourage them to make the adjustments? Could they apply the next year with a similar project but tweaked?
Yeah, absolutely.
Yes.
Sometimes they can apply at the next deadline.
With the very same project.
Yeah, same project with some tweaks.
Especially with a bigger, sorry to cut you off, but even with a bigger grant program like Open Door, I mean, these are very large grants. You'll get feedback. Doesn't mean to go away, come back, really try to apply that feedback, and come back again if you really believe in the idea and the partnership.
We have a different scenario, and this is a really important point to keep in mind. So I'm with the ministry, and we do project funding. So we're not like the arts councils where they are about creation and dissemination of arts, but we're around sector development and organizational development. So each pocket of money or envelope of money. Each program has a specific objective for it. So the government is going, we've got these $1 million for this fund intended to do X. So your project needs to deliver on that. Quite often it's not about art. It's about job creation, capacity building, sector building, all sorts of other stuff, because the arts councils take care of the creation of art. So it behooves you, twice in one person. Hey, I nailed it. Perfectly too. Yeah, great. It was a red letter day today. So it behooves you to read the guidelines very carefully to find out what the objective of this fund is. So why does this money exist? And what are the results intended for it? And then have the conversation with your advisor or grants officer. In our case, you'll find that, and I think this is probably true for a lot of the funds, not all, but a lot of the funds in the Department of Canadian Heritage. But for us, all of our funds encourage you, like one of the first lines in our grant applications is to call us. Talk about what it is that you're doing. And you need to determine what buttons you need to push, because it's not always about your art's awesomeness. Creating this and it's awesome, unique, wonderful. What we're looking for potentially could be, this awesomeness is going to result in greater capacity for our organization, and that's the hot button, not the awesome art. And you need to have the conversation and read the guidelines, because it's buried in, if the fund is guidelines are well written, you'll find it there. If you're at all uncertain, then get on the phone and ask. It's always a good idea to ask anyway, because anyone who may assess, or when it goes through the meat grinder of being approved or not, it's nice where it's different if they're looking at something and they don't know anybody, they're just going from ground zero, or if somebody has had a conversation with you. So it's not a bad idea. I talked to Chris, who had a question from the keynote speaker around the grandfathering of large organizations last with the keynote speaker. You may have heard that. There's all sorts of ebbing and flowing going on in arts management right now. So it's always a good idea to build, whether you're a new organization or a seasoned one, to build your relationship with your funders. And if they move on, because they do, you build a relationship with the next one. And it's your personal relationship and also your organization's relationship. Both of those have to be front and center, so that if you walk off and the organization is left floundering and they don't know who's at it. So it's you as a professional, but also your organization.
And I'm going to follow up on that. So while he's really interested in sort of the outcomes, I'm really interested in the art, because we are the Arts Council. So just be wary of, while there's the temptation to do a lot of cut and pasting from grant application to grant application, make sure that you're still answering the question. So what tends to happen is there are, for example, in my presenters program, those presenters also apply to Canadian Heritage. So then I will get a whole bunch of stats around audience numbers and demographics and stuff, but the question was never asked, you know, or that's one small, so we judge on artistic merit, impact, and viability. And so that covers maybe the impact piece, but what I often find is the art questions are never answered. Who are you programming and why? What is your curatorial vision? These questions don't get answered. They tell me about, you know, their venue, and they don't tell me about who's curating and why. So it's the same sort of idea of like, look at the guidelines. What is the priority of the funder, and make sure and resist the temptation to do too much cutting and pasting. Just answer the question.
That was always my job, you know, was to go through the applications and yellow mark all the key buzzwords and different applications, different buzzwords, and those buzzwords became headers.
Right. that-
Yeah.
Yeah.
that chapter was
Smart way to do it.
You need to get underneath the program that you're applying to. You have to take the time to understand what this thing is intended to yield.
Today's going to tackle risk management, and I think you're going to walk out of here, and I suspect you'll be scratching your head and saying, yeah, he's right. I never thought of that before. I never saw it in that light. And you'll have one of those epiphanies, and that's a word like behoove, by the way, in case you weren't in the morning session, that I often have when I talk with Bob, because he puts things in a very interesting perspective, and you see it in a new light. So I won't go through all the commendable work that he has done, but he has certainly accomplished a great deal in his career, and there's so much more that he's involved in now as a volunteer on many boards and active in the cultural and arts community. And I want to thank him because he did come in to talk to the class in financial management, I think it was, and he has engaged with our students a few times this past semester, obviously, and he just jumped right up quickly and said, yes, I'd be happy to be a keynote. He's one of the first people to confirm. So we're really privileged to have Bob with us here today. And without further ado, thank you, sir.
Thanks, Shelley. I don't know what to do with these kinds of introductions because it's like being introduced to someone who isn't you. Nevertheless, you have to embody yourself, and here we go. The topic that I was asked to speak on, managing risk for the not-for-profit arts sector, is one that is very special for me at the moment because I'm actually teaching a course on risk management in the cultural sector at University of Toronto Scarborough this term, and preparing for 12 3-hour lectures is a lot of preparation, and so I'm like really beefed up on this particular topic. Risk management is hot, and it is absolutely one of the fastest growing professions in Canada and around the world. Risk management. Such a thing was never discussed, and risk manager was never identified when I was young as an official occupation, and certainly not a kind of designation or a certification that one could earn. Yesterday, I did a Google search. Workopolis listed 2,925 vacancies for risk managers yesterday. Indeed.com listed 12,446 such vacancies in Canada, with 5,095 risk management vacancies in Toronto alone. Wowjobs.ca listed 10,367 risk management vacancies in Canada, with 3,874 in Toronto. Deutsche Bank just announced that in 2015 it added 2,700 non-front of office staff to its workforce, Deutsche Bank, and a hefty proportion of those were risk managers and compliance professionals. According to Glassdoor, the average compensation for risk managers in its surveys is currently $102,193. And in the UK, total compensation for risk management professionals increased in the 4 years between 2012 to 2016 by 25%. Compensation for risk managers in the UK. What's going on? Why all this emphasis on risk management? Much of what's happening today is in reaction to some high-profile business shenanigans that took place in the 90s. Investors lost billions of dollars to companies like Enron, which were structured as Ponzi schemes, literally. The public demanded greater protection, which in turn led to cries for higher standards of accountability. A major outcome was the 2002 Sarbanes-Oxley legislation in the United States that raised the bar for financial reporting and auditing of all kinds. Despite this public scrutiny, and despite this increased demand for greater regulation, Sarbanes-Oxley was followed in 2007 by the meltdown of the US banking sector. So much for regulation. Based on the issuance and subsequent sale of subprime mortgages that triggered a global economic crisis that we're finding ourselves still trying to drag our way out of. The public demanded even more protection, and the contemporary practice of risk management came into its own. Today, there are dozens of programs across Canada that lead to the certification of risk managers, but by and large, the field of risk management is geared to insurance, finance, accounting, and audit. So, there's this enormous explosion in a professional designation called risk management, and it's almost all in the financial realm. So what's the connection with the not-for-profit arts sector? Why is this even a topic for our consideration? The answer is simple. Not-for-profits are governed by boards of directors increasingly drawn from the worlds of business and finance. In exercising their fiduciary responsibilities, i.e., when the boards of directors do their job as fiduciaries for the organizations that they govern, fiduciary, of course, meaning undivided loyalty to the well-being of that organization. Some people confuse fiduciary with financial. It's not the same thing. It's undivided loyalty. So when the boards of directors exercise their fiduciary responsibility, they instinctively turn to what they know best, to what they use in their own work to protect their organization's interests. And that, it turns out, is risk management. Boards of directors increasingly want to know what are the biggest risks facing the not-for-profits they voluntarily govern, and what is management intending to do about them. I can vouch for this personally. I've been on both sides of the board table, and the language and the conversation has changed radically in the last 10 years. Awkwardly, little of the language for risk management comes from the not-for-profit sector. As I pointed out, it really comes from another sector of society altogether, the financial realm. Sarbanes-Oxley, for example, specifically excludes not-for-profits. But that doesn't negate the value of seeing not-for-profits through a risk management lens. In fact, doing so is a valuable governance strategy, and risk analysis should be an essential part of any arts manager's toolkit. I can tell you it's a foolish arts manager today who responds to a question from the board, what is your risk management analysis, or what is your risk analysis of this organization, and answers, oh, I don't know, or what's that got to do with what we do? What's that got to do with making art? It's a foolish response. Anyone on their game should be able to understand the nature of the question from the board members and have already in their hard drive a strategy for responding to these questions, not with all the answers, but with an attitude or an openness to be engaged in a risk management conversation. So how does it work? First, it's essential to identify what kinds of risks a particular organization faces. These fall into categories, and it's important to begin by saying, well, what categories of risk exist in this organization? Typical categories of risk can include financial risks, legal or regulatory compliance, HR risks, artistic risks, ethical risks, fundraising risks, IT risks, catastrophic risks, reputational risks, and the list goes on. Sitting down with colleagues and just making a list can be revelatory in itself. Then it's necessary to determine the risk appetite within the organization for each kind of risk. Risk appetite. How willing are we? What is the level of our appetite to have risks in each of these categories? This is essentially a board decision because the board is the body legally accountable for the organization's well-being. But the board's position will likely be strongly informed by what management says, so management should be actively engaged in this process. In not-for-profits, boards tend to have little appetite for financial risk, for example, little appetite for non-compliance risk, little appetite for ethical risk. But equally well, in the arts sector, they typically have a very big appetite for artistic risk. It's the nature of an arts organization to take artistic risks. And it's essential to have this conversation with boards to be able to stake one's ground, to be able to say, well, at least I don't have to be overly defensive on the artistic side for the risks that we're taking with an untried work, a new artist, a production that's never been seen before. None of it, though, can be taken for granted. The fact that you're in an arts organization, you cannot take for granted that the board understands that it has a big appetite for risk. In fact, in initiating the conversation, it's likely that they would say, we have a very small appetite for risk. It's only in the conversation does it elevate. Well, actually, that's not true. That's not true. We're not trying to put on Broadway musicals necessarily. We're not trying to mount works that have already demonstrate their commercial validity. We are willing and anxious to take a flyer on things. That can only come from a conversation. You cannot assume that the board has this in their minds when they come to the board table. They do, I think, have this in their mind when they come to performances or to exhibitions, but it's not necessarily the case that this language comes easily to their lips, because the language that comes most easily to their lips is risk management language. It's language that essentially tries to mitigate risk. The next step is to identify specific risks within each category. What are the financial risks or the non-compliance risks or the fundraising risks facing the organization? It's one thing to say, I have financial risks. It's another thing to say, well, what are they? What are they? Well, you know, I have confirmed revenue from this funder for the next 3 years. Well, that's not a risk. You have it confirmed for the next 3 years. But I've sent in an application to this funder and it's not confirmed. Well, good. All right, we can identify that as a financial risk. What's a kind of fundraising risk? Well, I've had this donor, and this donor has been giving me $5,000 a year for the last 4 years, and I have no reason to believe that they won't continue to do this, but I haven't been assured of this. Well, that's a risk. Sitting down with the donor might be a good idea to just have that kind of conversation. Identifying what the specific risks are in each category is necessary. When you've done all of these things, you have to assess them in terms of priority according to two simple dimensions. One of them is probability. How probable is this risk? And the other one is impact. How serious would it be to my organization if this risk came about, if this uncertainty proved to be true? Personally, I have a little rule of thumb. I score them in my head between 1 and 5, with 1 being the lowest and 5 being the highest, and then I multiply them together. So if there was a hugely high probability, you would give it a 5. This is highly probable. This is a risk that's likely going to happen. And if it's a kind of devastating impact, I would give it a 5. If this happens and there's a high probability, we're in deep, deep, deep trouble. Multiply them together, you can have the highest possible score of 25. But you can see that there are differences as we go through allocating these kinds of things. For example, if you're holding an outdoor festival, let's say, the chance of rain may be 3. And the potential impact of the rain may be 4. So you'd end up with a rating of 12 out of 25. The chance of a tornado, on the other hand, might be 1. But the impact would be 5. So then you end up with a score of 5. Why do you do this? Because what you want to do is compare the relative priority that you ought to be attaching to the various risks that are facing your organization. Once you've done this and ranked them from highest to lowest score, if I can put it that way, you get some idea, well, what are the things, the handful of things, count them on one hand, what are the handful of things that it might be wise for me to spend some serious time on? What do you do with that serious time? Once again, there are 4 generic strategies for dealing with risks. Once you've identified them, and once you know from a priority perspective that they require a response on your part. These 4 are to avoid, to ignore, to contain, and to transfer or share the risk. To avoid a risk means taking a decision not to proceed in a certain direction because the potential damage is deemed to be too great. This is presumably what the Toronto Symphony Orchestra intended when it canceled the performance last fall by a contracted artist who had posted controversial political statements on social media. That was, I think, an intention to avoid risk. The fact that the orchestra's decision generated a whole new category of risk, reputational risk, underlines the complexity of risk management itself, especially in an artistic context. I think they intended to avoid the risk and unwittingly generated a new kind of risk that wasn't on the table in the first instance. Avoidance, however, raises a consideration that I haven't mentioned yet, and that is that risk is the flip side of opportunity. The flip side of opportunity. It's kind of taking the concerned, negative approach to something that has potential for the organization or for the future. Many people say the greater the risk, the greater the opportunity, or the greater the return. And we know this a lot from the stock market. The higher the volatility, simply or typically indicates the greater the possibility that you can either make big money or lose big money. And many people working in the cultural sector know about the volatility of the markets because they work in organizations that have endowed funds. And the endowed funds are invested, and the level of volatility of those investments is a really serious concern of the investment committee, and of course of management in turn, because when the returns are not good, management doesn't have the revenue or the income that they want and they need to run the organization. And when the returns are very good, management says, whoa, we have a chance in the future to have a little bit more security or stability from a financial perspective. Risk avoidance, simply stated, is a difficult strategy in a world where you want to make change. There is always an element of risk in change. The reason you want to make change, though, is because you see opportunities to do something different, better, more exciting, with greater return, etc. So avoidance as a response to risk is highly complex and needs to be carefully thought through. Just avoiding something, no, we're not going to do that, the risk is too great, has a number of very, very serious implications. To ignore a risk entails recognizing it's there, but deciding not to take any special precautions or actions, virtually doing nothing. Generally speaking, we ignore the risk of a sudden collision with a meteorite. As catastrophic as it would be, the risk falls into a category that we simply choose to ignore. Yes, it's possible. It is possible, and it would be absolutely catastrophic. But we would go nuts if we thought about all of the things that might happen, that could be catastrophic, but are highly unlikely to happen either in this moment or in this place or in my lifetime or what have you. The important thing, though, is that in terms of ignoring a risk, you must distinguish between ignoring, which is actually an active process, and ignorance, which is not active and in a sense is a state of not even caring, not even exploring, not even identifying a risk as existing. It is perfectly reasonable to ignore a risk that is highly improbable in your universe. But I would urge you to at least have the conversation in whatever organization or whatever setting you're in to figure out what those risks are. To contain a risk means taking actions that in some way limit its probability or limit its potential impact. So remember, those are the two things, a probability and an impact that you're most concerned about. This is the most frequent strategy for managing risk, and we often call this mitigating the risk. So you hear a lot of language about risk mitigation. That's what people are talking about. They're talking about containing the risk in some way, either containing its probability or containing its impact. Developing and communicating detailed policies for handling harassment in the workplace is a good example. Harassment policies represent a risk management strategy of containment. In both their development and implementation, such policies help everyone to understand what is expected of them and anticipate the consequences of non-compliance. So there's a higher consciousness within the organization when these kinds of policies are developed and shared, and a better understanding of what to do if situations arise. Recent terminations at the Canadian Olympic Committee, for example, were triggered not by the alleged harassment itself. There was alleged harassment. The accused individual actually resigned voluntarily. But the terminations were based on the fact that the terminated staff had been informed of the accusations, but had not acted in a timely or appropriate manner as clearly set out in its own policies. Detailed policies are examples of risk management containment, but you have to act on them. You have to act on them, or you trigger a new kind of risk, and the termination of those employees at the Canadian Olympic Association Committee is a good example of this. There are many such examples. The CBC, Giangameshi terminations, etc. Similarly, developing policies for what to do in the event of an IT breakdown, or loss of power, or 3-day snowfall, are all risk management strategies. Knowing what to do when the system crashes is a risk management strategy. It's risk containment of some kind and a reasonable expectation of leaders in the not-for-profit sector. If you run organizations and you don't have like a back cabinet of these kinds of strategies and responses, you're in trouble. You are making your organization vulnerable to risks in a needless manner. Another example would be an artistic offer that includes both known and unknown works, proven successful works, and high risk and unknown works in the same season. That's a way of containing risk. Okay, they might not all succeed, but over the time of the year, I can still sell tickets. I don't necessarily offend my audience, you know, this kind of thing. This is an example that I brought with me. Does anyone recognize what this is? I got this in the mail. Almost everyone in Toronto got this in the mail. We didn't ask for this. This was sent in the mail to every friggin' address in the city. It says Rad Block, potassium iodide tablets, blocks radioactive iodine. And it comes with a brochure that says, prepare to be safe. And it's issued on the back by Durham Region, City of Toronto, Ontario Power Generation. This is a risk containment strategy by the nuclear energy industry in case of a meltdown when you're within 40 kilometers of one of these nuclear stations, and there is a release of radioactive material, it's possible that there will be an effect on your thyroid. And these tablets are to be taken as prescribed on the package and the little brochure every day until they're gone by whoever's in the household. This is a risk containment strategy by an industry that sees itself as wanting to express and position itself as caring about the public and anticipating bad things, you know, and limiting the bad things that might happen. We do this in the arts all the time. This is not financial risk. They're not worried about money here. They're worried about the health consequences of an accident, the kind of thing that happened in Japan with the tsunami, things that are not predictable in the sense of what the probability might be, but are still imaginable and can be worked through or worked around or contained in some way. This is the kind of thing that we do in our professional lives within the not-for-profit arts sector on all of these different dimensions, from financial, doing this list, artistic, HR, ethical. We're doing this all the time. We're imagining what might happen that could be negative, and how do we contain or manage that could happen consequence in our particular work. Finally, sharing or transferring risk entails either passing the risk on to someone else or coming to an agreement to share the risks with others. Both are central to how the insurance industry is structured and to why we willingly pay high premiums to purchase insurance coverage for many different kinds of potential events. Fire insurance, health insurance, employment insurance, disability insurance, director's liability insurance, cancellation insurance, vehicle insurance, key man insurance. These are all examples, frequent, you know, a part of the normal work of the not-for-profit cultural sector, in which transferring to the insurance company or sharing with other organizations and other interests, the risk is totally normal in our lives. I should point out, when you look at the insurance industry a bit, you can find evidence of sharing risk among agricultural workers 3 millennia back in Egypt. They weren't sure where the Nile River was going to rise or fall from one year to the next. And so what they would do is they would pool together their resources in good years and find a way to survive the bad years in a risk-sharing context. This is very, very old. Even though I talked about risk managers as being a new industry, it's risk management is not the least bit new in terms of approaching and containing the possibility or probability of bad things happening in the future. I think that I would include many forms of artistic collaboration in this category as well, including co-production, which I know has been raised in other forums this morning. Having 2 or more companies share in the cost of creating and mounting a new work and then touring it from venue to venue makes a lot of sense from a risk-sharing perspective, whether it be in the performing arts or the museum sector. Lots of museums, for example, partner with other museums to put together a show, and then the show goes from this museum to that museum. Lots of performing arts organizations mount a new work, and then the work goes from one venue to another, from one market to another, and the risk dissipates over a bigger base. This is also the case with many festival collaborations and underpins the work of many opera and ballet companies, theaters, musical ensembles, major museums. Both the risks and the opportunities are shared. Not only are the costs reduced in some way, but the opportunity to get a return, or the probability of getting return, is heightened and increased in this process. It's also under the strategy that I would place the diversification of funding sources. We talk about that in Canada a lot. I had long believed that the diversity of public, private, and earned revenue sources made the Canadian not-for-profit arts sector more resilient. And while working at the National Ballet School, I got to see this resilience in practice. In 1995, the newly elected Harris government in Ontario announced it was cutting the school's funding by, wait for it, 100%. That was a loss of $836,000 a year. And yet, amazingly, we were able to end the next 11 years with surpluses, including the year we were cut. Largely thanks to the determination of the board to pursue alternative funding avenues. A diversity of funding sources is one of those risk-sharing strategies that works very well in the management of risk. This, too, is risk management, and it's only possible when people are willing to work together. It's part of the nature of saying, what are my risks? How do we, in some way, mitigate them or prepare or think ahead? And who can we bring into the fold to make that happen? In some respects, this all sounds straightforward, but I can tell you from my own experience, it's amazing how complicated it can all become. Personally, I think that the mass resignation of the Board of Directors of Goodwill Toronto a couple of weeks ago was designed to limit risks. They all resigned before they closed down the shops. But the result was anything but the mitigation of risk. Goodwill International deemed the mass resignation, in their words, egregious, which means outstandingly bad or shocking. And they stripped the organization of its membership in Goodwill International and its ability to use the Goodwill name or branding. I'm not a lawyer, and I don't know the backstory, But given that a not-for-profit needs a board of directors to function in an orderly manner, it's hard to reconcile the board's actions with its fiduciary duties. If fiduciary means total loyalty to the well-being of the organization, it's not clear why all the board directors would resign at exactly the same time from a risk management perspective. Enough of that. I think you get the point. Risk management may sound like it's focusing on the negative, but it's actually the opposite that it's at play. We're trying to create conditions that are best aligned for success. Risk management. I'm going to take some questions from the floor. Do people have, yes?
We've been talking a lot about telling your story.
Yep.
Would we be better off not using a complete narrative and starting to look at maybe some kind of graphic analysis that would inform our board better as we assess the risks now that we know, more from your talk? Or is it still about storytelling?
Ooh, that's an interesting question. I think the important part of the question is that you've got to have an exchange with your board on the subject. I can assure you that your board at some point, if you don't do anything or don't raise the subject yourself, is going to raise it for you. Especially board members who come from business will ask themselves, why aren't they raising risk with us? Why are they trying to cover something up? Are they hiding something? Whether or not you used a graphic representation or used some other form of communication isn't as compelling to me. Personally, I'm neither here nor there. Organizations have different scale, etc. So I can tell you I was shocked to discover that an organization that I sit on the board of, Art of Time, decided this year to present its budget and its program for next year within an arts management framework. Risk management framework. I was stunned. I had never actually seen a board present the core business of the organization within a risk management framework. And I thought to myself, holy Toledo, like the real world is writing my content here. I think it's time. I think it's hot. I think it's something that we need to master as arts managers, that we need to master the language of risk management so we know how to talk to our board, so we know how to stay in touch with what I won't call it the flavor of the month. If you go back 3,000 years, that's one hell of a lot of months. But something that's currently very, very active and on the minds of a heck of a lot of people. There is a reason why the financial community moved into this so desperately. People love risk in the financial community. They just all the time think that they're going to beat it. And when they don't beat it, they put enormous pressure on the profession to find some way, some better way of giving them assurance that the billions of dollars that they invest on a daily, weekly, monthly, trillions basis is not lost. And I would say to you that that's equally reasonable within our own particular work. Yes.
I'd kind of like to know what you do when you have the opposite situation where you have a board who is predominantly not business people,
Yep.
who don't have experience with risk management, and how do you convince them in the first place that they need to revisit these policies and make those sorts of decisions, and then how do you ensure that they realistically create realistic policies and realistic risk management strategies?
Well, the risk management strategies don't first and foremost reside with the board. The strategies themselves really reside with management, in my opinion. It's the board that demands them, typically. So if you find yourself in a circumstance where the board is not demanding them, fine. You know, it's not something that you have a lot of pressure to perform on, but it would be wise in your own thinking to say, well, you know, actually this might help me. This might help me to know what are the 3 things that I should be working hardest on next year to assure the stability and the well-being of this organization, and how can I positively discuss them with my board. So for example, you know, we don't have a lot of formal HR policies in my organization, but I think that puts us at risk because contractual relations are such an important part of what makes the organization successful. You know, the finance is only one half of it, the other half of it is the people. Maybe I should be doing more on the people side, and that would be a risk management strategy that I'd like to argue to the board deserves a little bit more money. So it might cost a little bit more money or time or effort or whatever. What the board absolutely has to do, though, is settle on the risk appetite. That's different than the risk strategy. The risk appetite where you get kind of buy-in and you get a reading from them. Well, you know, how much is enough? You know, how much risk can I take before I get fired? Right? That's a good conversation. That's a good conversation. Yes?
I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about the interaction between financial risk and artistic risk.
Uh-huh.
And how those two collide.
Well, if you're an arts organization, if you're an arts organization and you're counting on, let's say, ticket sales or exhibition attendance, and then it turns out that the performance or the exhibition is not artistically, it doesn't resonate well with markets or something, then you have a financial issue. And the question that should be raised is, have you built your year in such a way that you can accommodate an unsuccessful show? If you've built a year in which you get repeatedly unsuccessful shows, you are in financial trouble. Your organization is now in difficulty, and you ought to be challenging in some way the leadership or the decisions that are going on in the mounting of the show. One of the things that I'm myself wrestling with a lot personally is whether or not there's such a thing as artistic failure. You know, I keep thinking there isn't actually. You know, Bob, there isn't. I keep saying this to myself because I want to believe it desperately. You know, when people say just fail bigger or fail better, I think they're really talking to us in the arts, because that's how you learn and that's where you understand where the limits are, etc. But when you introduce a financial edge to it, it can be quite complicated. There is such a thing as a financial failure with an artistic product. But what I'm having trouble with is whether or not there's such a thing as an artistic failure. I guess one could say that incompetence would be an artistic failure or something, but you understand why I'm doing that. They are connected in the life of an organization that's an arts organization, because the organization likely is getting its reputation from the art, the quality of the art, but the organization may also get a very positive reputation from a number of high-profile, extraordinary risks that excite people. You know, there are many organizations that are proud to say, you know, people hated my last show and said we can't wait to see the next one, just because they like that edge. I was like really blown away to find out that people in this cold weather on the weekend had lined up all night to buy new running shoes that were released with the NBA All-Star game. New running shoes. And they were a partnership between Drake and Magic Johnson, or God knows who else. Who else? Michael Jordan, right. People stayed all night in like minus 25-degree temperatures to buy something they hadn't even seen. And I mean, I have a lot of respect for Drake, but I haven't got any confidence that he knows how to design a running shoe. Right? Like none whatsoever. And yet organizations are able to brand themselves in an extraordinarily successful risk-taking mode. So the release of a pair of shoes, who knew? Who attends, our new shows with that kind of excitement? People lining up all night in the cold to be the first to see something that, is only word of mouth. No one has seen an image of, no one knows the names of the cast, etc. I love this. Yes? Yeah, I'm out of time.
But I'm happy to see you're all here and you've all made it. I have the very good pleasure of being able to moderate a panel today, and we're going to talk about relationships and what works, specifically in the arts. And I must say, Arts Ahead people have assembled a panel that in particular, of late, youth programming or what they're presenting for very young audiences is absolutely inspiring. Now, quite often we hear it's only, people with gray hair that are going to arts events, et cetera, and these three are proving that that's wrong. So Sean O'Neill from the Art Gallery of Ontario does adult programming, and the other day I was at the Song Dong lecture, and the place was packed, and everyone there was under 25, which was amazing to see. So there was all sorts of different activities going on at the AGO at the same time. Chris Lorway, who is the Director of Programming. I probably get all your titles wrong, Get cards later, except for Madeline. She left them at home. So Chris deals with all the programming at Roy Thompson Hall and Massey Hall. And there's all sorts of partnerships that go on there. And there's one initiative that I think you're probably going to talk about at Massey Hall that is really inspiring. And again, full of a younger audience. Madeline, who works at the Sony Center and is also the executive director of Fall for Dance North, which had their premiere last year. And they brought in 11 dance companies into Toronto. All the tickets were $10, sold out for 3 days. And the audience skewed very young, which again is inspiring. So where we want to start today, Sean, can we start with you talking about a relationship that you built at the AGO that works? 5, 10 minutes, however long.
Sure, yeah. The thing that I'm going to talk about is a relationship that we have actually not with a cultural partner, but with a corporation. And the corporation is Timea. They're the parent company of Aeroplan. Most of you probably know Aeroplan is the Air Miles of Canada. And Timea oversees, what we work with on Timea is a prize, the Timea AGO Photography Prize. It's a $50,000 prize that we give to an international artist each year, and the public chooses the winner. So the public votes inside the gallery, online, and the winner receives $50,000. There's a group of expert curators who choose the short list, and then from there we open it up to the public. And for me, when we're thinking about case studies and successful partnerships, Timea comes to mind because it's a really different kind of experimental model for corporate culture sector collaboration. And I think there's a lot to talk about relative to some of the work that we've done with them. The first thing is, it's a sponsorship and a partnership that was sort of designed unlike others that we typically do at the AGO, where we take an exhibition or we take a property that's ripe for funding and we shop it out to different financial institutions, corporations, individuals who might support it. In this case, this started as a conversation between the head of Aeroplan and our director at the time, Matthew Teitelbaum, around the passion that the director of Timea had for photography and the appetite at the AGO to try to do different kinds of things in the museum sector that related to public engagement. We're an organization that's really invested in trying to find ways to maintain our expertise, but not necessarily maintain our authority. And so what we started working on and designing with Timea in conversation with them was a program that could help us do some new things, experiment, have a little bit of financial freedom to try different models of engagement and presenting content, and for them to dip their toe into the sponsorship world through a program that was kind of custom designed for the things that they wanted to bring to the table and the ways that they wanted to learn and grow. So some examples of that are built into the partnership is a shared team structure where the AGO is not just the team working on the program and developing the program, but we actually partner our marketing, communications, social, fundraising, and web development teams with counterparts at AMEA, who then teach the AGO staff all kinds of corporate business practices that we didn't know before. In turn, their staff get to work on a special project that for them feels like, oh my God, something outside of getting people to buy Aeroplan points. And it's exciting and a staff engagement tool for them. That was the beginning of how the partnership evolved. It slowly started expanding over the years to the point where AMEA decided they were expanding their offices, they wanted to build an art collection. And so as we were starting to think about ways they could activate or the benefits that the AGO could give them in return for the investment they made, one of the benefits we came up with was that we have an internal art rental and sales department. We would help them build their collection. We would provide consultation. We'd send a curator in once a year to advise them on acquisitions. In turn, they buy everything through our art rental and sales department, which created more revenue for us and in turn generated PR benefit for them. They were profiled in all kinds of business publications about forward-thinking offices and ways that art can help the professional environment. A way that they were able to leverage something to help us was they have a program that they started to pilot called Data for Good. Essentially, Aeroplan is a data marketing company. It's not about rewards anymore. It's about how to leverage data to tailor your invitation to customers. There's all kinds of good things about that and all kinds of things that we could talk about offline about data and that they're aware of and working through. So one of the things they did was pilot this event that was about helping not-for-profits leverage data to access their communities and their audiences in different ways. They took our art courses. We have about a $500,000 studio art business. They looked at the patterns of who was buying, when they were buying, how often they were buying, how they were returning, gave us a whole bunch of data that allowed us to raise our revenue by about 50% over 2 years. Through this kind of reciprocal benefit of the partnership. In turn, they got a ton of PR about how great their program is, and it is a great program. So I think when I think about the AMEA partnership and the ways that it's evolved and grown, and as our objectives have shifted and their objectives have shifted, we've shifted the program and we've shifted the objectives, some of the lessons that I've taken away from it are, from the beginning, having a kind of set of shared values and an openness and a transparency as to why each partner is involved, and then being able to be flexible as the journey progresses through the ways that there are new leaders that come in, there are new business objectives that come up for both parties. We have different things we want to do with the partnership. We learn as we go. And I think because the partnership was built through a shared conversation about wanting to do something experimental, because we were able to find touch points along the journey. We're now heading into year 8 of this partnership that allowed us to shift and pivot and try and experiment with new modes of engagement and new modes of reciprocity and benefit for each partnership. And we were able to stay flexible, stay open, stay honest, stay communicative throughout that process. We've ended up with something that is, I think, one of the most preeminent prizes in Canada, and now is a model for other arts institutions. We get calls all the time for people that are talking about ways of engaging people online, engaging people in galleries, getting people to have their say, because we've cracked a lot of things through our partnership with AMEA that we wouldn't have been able to otherwise, through their measurement, through their data, through their analytics, and through the stories we can tell through that measurement and data. I mean, even down to our project management principles. Because when you collaborate with staff and you bring 2 different cultures together, you start to learn processes that actually can then inform your own. And I think for them, in a similar way but in a different way, whereas they've made us a little more linear in our thinking, we've helped make them a little bit more non-linear and linear in their thinking. And of course, they measure their staff engagement and the ways that their staff are engaged, and this has been a real benefit for them. So the practice of that is open and honest communication at all levels, from the CEO to the people who are on the ground communicating and doing the work, and a willingness to be flexible, to change, to stay open, and to respond in a way that allows you to kind of give up something to help the partner get something. And hopefully that's a reciprocal relationship. So that's where I would start, as something that's been positive and long-term. And I oversee the partnership at the AGO, so 3 or 4 years ago, I was the project manager of that prize and that partnership. Now it's within my portfolio, but it's been a really interesting thing to watch grow and evolve and change over the course of those number of years.
Excellent. Chris, you want to tell us about the partnership?
Sure. So my staff is probably ready to kill me right now because we're all partnerships all the time over the last year. I think to reinforce what Sean said, entering into any partnership has to be about equity exchange. You both feel that your contribution is in some way advancing your interests, but also the partner needs to feel the exact same way. And whenever that's out of balance is when partnerships, I think, start to struggle and over time ultimately fail. We are approaching partnerships as a way of trying to advance the profile of the organization within the community. And we've, as I said, gone through a number of different initiatives this year that some have been great, and I think we're going to get later on in the discussion to some that did not go as well. But to start off, I would say one of our biggest successful partnership initiatives has been with multiple partners, our patio series that we launched at Roy Thompson Hall. And again, to reinforce what Sean said, I think at a certain point in a partnership situation, you have to, as a curator or a leader, be willing to sort of step back and realize you're not an expert. And I think that for a lot of people in the arts world, that sense of ceding any of that curatorial responsibility, and there was often that sense that art came from the man on the hill, and I think that there's a much more democratic way of looking at it right now, especially in a city like Toronto, where there are so many different forms of artistic expression that really make up the fabric of who we are as a community. And you want to be able to tap into all that to tell the story of your city and your institution, but to think that you as an individual or even you as a team are knowledgeable in all those areas, I think is naive and frankly dangerous. In the case of the patio, we wanted to take the idea of the edifice of Roy Thompson Hall and try to break it down. For a lot of people, it was a place where the TSO played there. It's where all the TIFF galas were. It had that sense of occasion and almost it was a dress-up space, and we wanted to humanize it a little bit. So, if any of you are familiar with the space, there's a sunken pond right along King Street that's below grade, and a beautiful sort of reflecting pool that the architect Erickson had designed to be a little bit of the north in the center of the city. And while beautiful, it was a very underutilized space, and we felt that there could be great value in that space as a public space. 2 years ago, just as I was starting with the organization, they had done a little bit of an experiment where over a couple of nights they had brought in some performers, mostly from the indie music world, and had put a stage in the pond and tried out live performance in the space. And in the first year, it was a good experiment. I think they learned a lot, but as somebody who was coming into the organization, one of the observations I had right away was the way the stage was configured, you had your back to the city. So all the artists were performing into the building to an audience there, so it gave the sense that it was a private event. It wasn't helped at all by the fact that the only way to actually get into the space was to find your way down through the path and then into the space. So we talked a lot internally about how to rectify that and actually to open it up. So. And also to increase capacity. So we worked with our architecture firm, KPMG and Marianne McKenna, to start to think about how we could re-envision the space and reorient it so that it was more front-facing and open to the city. And so we built a deck over about a third of it, and then put a stage so that it was actually facing down King Street. So as you were walking back to the subway, if you worked in the west part of town and you were coming back into the city, you would see the performances as you were walking in and hopefully be drawn into the space. We also worked on opening up an access point in David Pico Square so that people could come right off the park down a staircase into the space, making it much more accessible. And then we put in amenities like a partnership with Bark Barbecue and our F&B team to create both food and beverage that was hopefully enticing and attractive. And then we had to bring the space to life. And so right away, my mandate to my team was how do we think about ways in which we can create a vibrant atmosphere that really celebrates the city. And so immediately we went out to organizations like the Canadian Reggae World, Lula Lounge, who many of you know has one of the great salsa clubs in town. We went to partners like Small World Music, our friends at Hillside Festival. And what we did was that we tried to get all of them to come in and say, we're actually gonna open this space up to you. We'll give you a pair of dates, we want you to co-curate with us a double bill that in some way reflects your organization and fills this space in a way that's going to be enticing and celebratory of the city. And through that, we ended up getting a great range and mix of artists. Danae, who some of you may know, who's here today, was brought on as our first Charlie Cutts intern and managed that whole event over the summer. So she did a great job, and we did 22 events over the course of the summer, and attracted people that we averaged, I think, about 400 people a night. And we saw really an audience that had never come to the space before actually coming for the first time. And in some ways, they may or may not make the transition into Roy Thompson Hall, but as a space and as a corporation, we now feel that we have an audience that in some ways will keep coming back, whether it's to the summer programs or hopefully if we do other things in the hall that are linked to that we can make that transition happen. But through these partnerships, we leveraged, we gave them an opportunity to feel that they were part of our institution. They brought us their marketing heft, being able to reach out to audiences that we didn't necessarily have the database to go out to. And through that, we both created the sense of atmosphere that had never been experienced in that particular place before. And it was a great success. We had over 10,000 people over the course of the summer. Some of our biggest nights were nights that we didn't necessarily know were going to be big nights. We had a Mongolian punk band in, Hungai, and that was our biggest attendance. We had almost 700 people crammed into the square that night. So it was amazing to sort of see the response that we got from communities, and the partners who we were there with took great pride in the fact that they felt it wasn't just a Roy Thompson show, they felt it was their show. And that partnership and that equity exchange really contributed to the success of the venue.
I think Fall for Dance North is different from what these two are speaking about in the sense that it was a brand new organization. And as such, it just would not have happened without the partnerships that we formed. There were many, many partnerships because Fall for Dance North is a team of 3 people and 3 people who have full-time jobs. So to put on the festival that we did was an enormous feat. And as I said, just frankly would not have happened without a few key partnerships. The biggest one would have been the Sony Center. So just to step back a bit, Fall for Dance North it's based on a festival that is produced by City Center in New York. So it is modeled on something that is already very successful. And it was conceived as an audience development initiative. So the idea is that for $10, you get to see a full program of some of the best dance companies in the world. So last year on our program, we had companies like the National Ballet of Canada performing in the same program as an Aboriginal hoop dance piece. We had a classical Indian company from India. There was a company from Brazil. So our hope is that in bringing people to see a wide spectrum of dance, that they will fall in love with dance. And frankly, it's not a big risk because for $10, well, what can you get for $10 these days? When
first Thursdays
sorry, I'm speaking to the wrong people here. When Ilter, who is our artistic director and co-founder, first presented the idea to the Sony Center, he pitched it as something that the Sony Center would produce. The Sony Center, though, it's not equipped to do that. That's not what we do. What the Sony Center could do and what they did do, which was incredibly valuable, was they provided the venue. So we did not pay rent at the Sony Center. And as you know, the Sony Center, it has a fully equipped rehearsal hall. It has breakout spaces, huge lobbies. It has a stage with an appropriate dance floor, dance booms. We have just tons of equipment to throw at this production. And then also what the Sony Center provided was human resources. So we had access to the Sony Center's marketing team, to the education outreach manager at the Sony Center at the time, and also to the production department. And as I said, as a team of 3, that human resources element was critical. We just would not have been able to make it work. So from the Sony Center's perspective, just in speaking to the need to have, for the partnership to work for both, Fall Dance North came at a really, at a good time, frankly. The Sony Center, I think, is perceived to be a very commercial building. It's a huge building, which is partly why we have a lot of commercial product there. But we really are trying to sort of rebrand the Sony Center and make people aware of what the venue is capable of doing. And so from that perspective, an event like Fall for Dance North was incredibly valuable. It brought a whole bunch of people into the Sony Center that never come to the Sony Center. We analyzed our sales data, and 64% of the people who came to Fall for Dance North had never purchased a ticket to the Sony Center ever before. That's huge. The Sony Center does, we have comedy, we have big concerts, we have dance, Luminato comes into the building every year. We do a huge spectrum of programming, and 64% had never set foot in that building before. So that was amazing. I would say, thankfully the partnership will continue next year, or else there wouldn't be a year two. And I really see it as that partnership is growing. The civic theaters, as some may know, have been amalgamated. So right next door, there's a 900-seat theater, there's a 450-seat theater, the Blue Pell and the Jane Mallet. And so our partnership with the Sony Center is also a way for us to grow the festival.
Just a question for you, Madeline. With the Sony Center being there, and Mark not being here, and John Tory not being here, so Mark gives you the venue for free. Mm-hmm. Okay, taxpayers' money, being well spent. In my mind. Well spent. How are the discussions going for how year two is going to go in year three? Because at a certain point in time, you're going to have to pay for the venue, or have some sort of arrangement, cost sharing of some sort. Have you started those discussions yet?
No. Well, yes. What we have discussed is that the arrangement will continue. So that the Sony Center didn't really come on as officially a co-producer last year. To be honest, I think a lot of people didn't believe we could pull off what we did, and I think, therefore, people shied away from making the partnerships official, so to speak, and public. And now the Sony Center has come on board and has agreed to a three-year agreement under the exact same terms. So at least for the next 3 years, we will have the venue, and we will also have the human resources support. In return, we are recognizing the Sony Center officially as a co-producer for this event. And as I explained, that has, optically, that has a huge value for the Sony Center.
Chris, what are the plans for this summer coming up?
We will continue the series, and we're going back to a lot of partners that we did work with last year, and looking at adding some new ones. The idea over time is to expand it. We're currently 2 nights a week, so we're hoping eventually to get up to 3. We wanted 1 more year of just making sure that it was working well before we made that leap. But again, just trying to build on the success of last summer at this point.
You talked about working with Hillside and very successful Lula Lounge, etc. How do some of them, in their mandate as not-for-profit organizations, and not that this is your responsibility to look into, but that might be outside of the scope of their mandate, to co-present something not in their own venue, not in their own city even. Did any of them discuss that, or was just they're going to take on this project?
Well, I think to go back to the panel, or Bob's talk before, I think the risk for them was very, very low. All we were looking for them to do was to spend a bit of time working with our team to come up with appropriate artists to go onto the bill. There was no financial risk for them, so it was purely a programmatic and marketing partnership. And again, we gave them the profile as part of the series. If you see Lula Lounge, again, it might not only be Lula, save the mix of the people who came out to the 2 Lula shows were 20% Lula, 40% patio people, and then say another 40% people walking by. That 80% that weren't the Lula people were being exposed to their brand, which hopefully would drive traffic. If they had an incredible evening watching the Lula All-Stars and then knew they could see them a couple weeks later back at Lula Lounge, then I think that's the point of equity exchange, where they feel that is actually building on their brand and their business.
Sean, and before I get to the hard question, which is coming next, so with the Amima Photo Prize, how many more years is it going? How far do you look down the road with them as corporate sponsors? And do you see that changing and being more dynamic as you go along?
Yeah, I mean, it's a program that's meant to respond to both partners' level of engagement. So actually, we're in negotiation right now, in full transparency, to extend the partnership for X number of years. And that's looking very good.
What's X?
It's the X. I can't tell you. That's why I said X. So we're coming out of a 3-year agreement following the first 5, and now we're looking into the future. We come up with a strategic plan for that particular partnership every year. It almost runs like a mini institution within the institution. Because there's such a large group of staff who work on it across organizations, it has a dedicated project manager, and we think about it in sort of multi-year chunks. So we're talking about what are the overarching objectives and what are the things we're going to be looking at in terms of our strategies and tactics to move the prize and partnership forward. Those are 2 different things. You know, the partnership is the art in the office piece and the data piece. The prize is the expression of that partnership and the way that we are speaking to the public about the partnership. So we think about that in a multi-year plan, and then we also think about how we're going to measure it in a multi-year plan. So there's targets according to KPIs, key performance indicators, that tell us how we're doing. I mean, I feel like in some ways doing this partnership was like getting my MBA, because we had to learn at the AGO so many business practices that we did not use, especially around measurement and how you tell a story of what you're trying to do. So yeah, it's more to come.
So read the newspapers when you sign on for
soon. Yeah.
Okay, now a equally as interesting question, and perhaps more difficult. I want to know about a relationship, perhaps not with your organization, perhaps with a neighbor down the street, some organization you've heard of that screwed up.
You want like a breakup story?
Yeah, well, get those later at the reception.
I mean, obviously, I don't think any of us are going to talk about what organizations specifically we've had bad relationships with, but I think in principle, I have had bad relationships or partnerships that started out. I mean, we talked about having shared values at the very beginning and a kind of mutual reciprocity around what's possible. I think every partnership that I've embarked on has started out in that way, because I wouldn't sign the AGO onto a partnership unless it did. But when it goes bad, I think there's 2 things in my experience that happen. One is a breakdown of communication, and the other is a lack of honesty or transparency, and they're related. So we had a partner. We often partner on our First Thursday program with different arts organizations who will give us a little bit of extra funds to round out our program. For those of you, does everybody know what First Thursdays are? They're our monthly sort of art party for relatively younger audiences. Organizations often partner with us to help us expand the scope of the program, but also to bring in their own audiences and different audiences and generate profile for their brand. It can be good for us because we can do more things, but it can be complicating for us because there's other partners to work with, and partnerships always make things more complicated. Always more work, always more complicated. So we had a situation where there was, the AGO is bound by CARFAC to pay artist fees according to certain thresholds, and we should be paying those artist fees. There was an organization who, when we signed on, told they were going to bring 2 artist projects to the table, told me they were paying artist fees. I told them what the artist fees need to be paid for when they came to the AGO. Communication kind of broke down over the course of the project. We took on more than we thought we would. And the artist, at the end of the night, when we were wrapping up his project, said, "Man, that was a lot of work to not get paid." And so we never partnered with them again, and we never would. That's one example. Another example is when you're partnering with an organization that's in a similar kind of planning production cycle as you, and you both get busy at the same times, and you both have a lot going on, you have to be even more diligent about communication. and it's really easy for that to break down or for somebody to miss a series of conference calls or whatever. And push can come to shove when you're working on projects with big institutions like the AGO specifically, where decisions need to be made or things need to happen that can really affect the outcome of a project. So we were partnering with somebody to present an aerial work, and aerial work at the AGO with our building operations and our health and safety restrictions, and they wanted to hang from the rafters in Walker Court. You can imagine, it's really difficult. It's possible, but it's difficult. And our partner missed 4 or 5 or 6 different touch points and different deadlines. And so in the end, the project was compromised. I can say that. We went forward with it, but in a compromised way. And it was in the context of First Thursday. And the artist was really unhappy, really, really unhappy. And what ended up happening was, because our partner was their primary point of contact and they were really bad at communication, it all came back on us. And in my opinion, we weren't necessarily the ones who, it didn't need to happen that way. And we were really trying for it to not happen that way. So again, I would be really reticent to partner with them again. And for me, I'm always looking for people who I can look across the table with and talk to like a human, right? And have a real conversation with, and have an honest conversation with about our objectives, and get some of the, negotiation piece out of the way at the very beginning, but continue to be talking about those principles from conception to production and afterward. We're in a partnership right now, and it's working really well.
That was just announced this morning.
Yes.
And I didn't see it in the news yet, so
I haven't seen you.
let us.
Well, we announced today that Steve Martin's going to be talking at Roy Thompson Hall. It's the first time we've had one of sort of the talks that we would typically do at the AGO at Roy Thompson, and it's the beginning of what we hope will be a larger conversation with some other aspects. So that came out today at noon.
Yep.
Mm-hmm. Around the Lauren Harris show that Steve Martin co-curated that opens at the AGO on July 1st.
Right, and the show has already been in Los Angeles to huge acclaim.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, so June 22nd, Roy Thompson Hall, Steve Martin in conversation with Andrew Hunter, who's our curator of Canadian art.
Buy tickets now. AGO.
Actually, next week.
Next week.
Yeah.
Chris, something that hasn't gone well or that you heard didn't go well?
Well, I think what's always interesting to think about is the way that your organization works when partnerships are constructed. And in a lot of cases, I would say in particular on the corporate side, the idea and the delivery are somewhat separated from each other, usually through a development department or a corporate sponsorship department. And I think that's where you can often get yourself into trouble, because I think that the mandate of the development department is obviously to hit revenue goals and to sell. And so they're off there meeting and pitching with various corporate sponsors who, again, with brand alignment, have very specific objectives. So this goes back to my Luminato days, but where we sort of had very complex and in-depth relationships with multiple corporate partners. L'Oreal was our main partner for the whole time I was there, and the way that deal worked was actually L'Oreal Canada, the parent brand, was the sponsor, but each of the up to 20 brands that fell under that could activate during the festival.
Whoa.
So it was essentially you were managing 20 partnerships as opposed to just one.
Wow.
And there would be, because it was so complex and moving so fast and furiously, you would get insane requests from people on your development team that they had already kind of said yes to, and then came to you and said, you need to make this happen. And there were times where we tried our best to deliver whatever we could, and there were other times where we absolutely said, absolutely not, this is not going to happen.
Like makeup lessons with Laurie Anderson?
Yeah. Well, worse. The worst one that I had to basically say a big fat no to was at one point L'Oreal Professional was one of the brands that could be activated, and our team had told them that we had Joni Mitchell in town for a week, and so they came to me and said, oh, well, L'Oreal Professional wants to style her hair for each day during the course of the festival. And I was like, I'm not even going to take that request forward. Just shut it down. And even more recently, we have a great relationship with Labatt's, who's our beverage partner, And so one of their big things recently, I'm sure you've seen all the media, is that they want Budweiser to be cool and they want to align it with music. And so, a lot of it is negotiation. Like on the patio, they wanted to install what they called the Bud meter, so which was this kind of like, literally that, when you raised your buds up in the air, which they wanted us to do from the stage, the meter would go to like from lame to cool. Which we tried to convince them that it would, actually, as you raise your buds up, you'd actually go from cool to lame. But yeah, it was just one of those things that didn't quite fit, and even and so we worked on a compromise where we knew that the brand fit for that space wasn't the best one. It was more of a craft beer crowd that we were drawing to the space, and Bud was not the right fit. So we've now, as we look at next year, we're actually changing the brand that's more aligned. But we had one instance where they sent brand ambassadors, aka Bud Girls, who were on the staircase of Roy Thompson Hall, sort of welcoming people, and it changed the whole feel and vibe of the evening, and it was just improper brand alignment, and I think that's what's often difficult to manage.
Okay. Madeline?
My stories are not nearly as exciting. I think with Fall for Dance, I think that the most difficult partnership for us was actually with New York City, City Center, New York. Sort of in line with my comment about the Sony Center, I don't think City Center thought that we'd actually pull this off in Toronto. And so when I flew down to New York to have a preliminary conversation with the executive director of City Center, she was very supportive. She said she'd fly to Toronto and she'd help us fundraise. There were talks of sharing programming, which is a great idea and something that we are trying to do again, to try to mitigate costs. And then we never really connected with them again until we had our first article in the paper, and they were not pleased. They didn't like our logo. They didn't like the way we were talking about City Center New York in terms of, we had said it was, based on Fall for Dance New York, and they didn't like that. So there's a lot of things that that they were displeased with, and I really think it was just a shock. So to your point, in that instance, a really honest, upfront conversation outlining the parameters of what we were doing in Toronto would have been really, really helpful. As a result of that, they actually approached us with a license agreement to use the name Fall for Dance, and it was really because of the way that our initial partnership was handled. And thankfully, I had a very civil conversation with them, a really encouraging conversation, and it sort of all came out that that's why this license agreement had come about, and it went away. So yes, having those upfront conversations are incredibly, incredibly important.
How much did they want in the licensing agreement to use the name? You want to talk about that?
Too much.
Well, too much for me. It was a 3-year licensing agreement. It was $5,000 US the first year, which of course is who knows what at this point, and then $10,000 the second year and $10,000 the third year. We have changed that agreement.
Happily, it's gone away.
Yes, not entirely, but enough that, but yes, and there's a lot of goodwill, and just the language in that agreement, it was that Toronto would defer all of its programming to New York, which doesn't work for us. We have different programming cycles. They actually announce very late. They don't announce their program until the summer. We are ready to announce any day now. So for them to say that ultimately we have to defer our programming to them, it just doesn't work. This very honest conversation resulted in that kind of language, that sort of negative language going away, and instead it was that we will work together to try to bring international artists. We will always stay in touch. We will. We agreed on language that Fall for Dance North is inspired by New York, and the situation was resolved literally in a 10-minute conversation.
Good. Just before I take some questions from the floor, I'm going to name names and talk about the sponsorship line in the sand from a while back. The Royal Winnipeg Ballet had a long-standing relationship with Du Maurier when they were allowed to spend money on the arts. And Du Maurier came up to the point with the Royal Winnipeg where they were demanding to have Du Maurier orange on the curtains before the ballet. Is this going too far? What do you think? Or perhaps Evelyn Hart should have had a Du Maurier orange tutu? Where's the line?
All the dancers had to smoke. That's changed already.
Well, no, all the dancers do smoke, but where's that line?
I think it stays outside the door. Like we had a bit of a hard fast rule at Luminato where nothing came in the auditorium. So we would sometimes activate the lobby spaces, but our first instance of that was in the first festival of 2007. We did the world premiere of Leonard Cohen and Philip Glass's Book of Longing. And I remember that I forget, one of the L'Oreal brands was on that, and they actually wanted to send in brand ambassadors to go down to the seats and hand out samples. And we had to really make that case that the minute the people in particular walk through, I believe that the whole experience begins once you walk into the front door of the theater, but even more so once you enter the chamber, then that should be the place where you start to prepare yourself for whatever you're going to see. And to have brand ambassadors into that space, I felt was crossing the line.
Sean, there.
I think it depends on the situation. For us, we've pushed it a lot over the last 4 or 5 years at the AGO, but to the extent that we don't have a house necessarily where you're in this one space that's before the art and then you're in the art. The art's everywhere. We do have some spaces where art isn't, where there are sort of more social gathering spaces, or the places where we put bars, for example, when we have our big events. But it's on a case-by-case basis. I think we make sure that we never do something that an artist would feel uncomfortable with. That's our check. We look at each other and say, would we ever put a logo on the wall in the gallery space? No. Would we allow a sponsor to come in the context of an event, in a space where there isn't art, and do a kind of art making where they gave away an invitation to come into their store and get 10% off, which we did with Joe Fresh? Yeah, we probably would. So it's a gut check, and it's a conversation with colleagues, and we do really evaluate these things on a case-by-case basis. One example where it was beyond the line for us was, and I would say, by the way, yes, the Du Maurier thing is beyond the line. We had a sponsor who wanted to activate by bringing in, they were going to commission an artist to make a sculpture out of the flip-flops that they sold, and they were going to put it on a plinth and put a label on it, which to us felt confusing for our visitors, and also undermine the artists whose work we had commissioned to specifically perform that night under a different set of circumstances. So anything that looks like art, feels like art, is being commissioned as art, we don't do.
Madeline, any line?
I would agree that it's on a case-by-case basis, at least the way the Sony Center approaches it, and that's sort of, I have to wear my Sony Center hat to answer that. We haven't gone into the theater yet, but I know that we would, and I don't, it just depends. We do such different programming in that space that sometimes it would not be offensive at all. For example, we've just recently purchased a huge movie screen which will live in the theater, and we are doing more and more programming of those feature film with orchestra shows, and we absolutely would put a sponsor on that movie screen, for instance. And then in other cases, we have F&B sponsors. We definitely would allow, beer into the venue for certain things, but then there are definitely situations where we have drawn the line on that. I can't think of one specifically, but I know that we have.
Well, and it depends on how it feels, because now I just realized I said we wouldn't allow sponsorship in the galleries, but every gallery you walk into has a donor's name, right? So it all depends.
And just to clarify, we, for Live at Massey Hall, which is one of our series, we do project this TD as our current sponsor, and we have a big gobo at the back of the stage that says Live at Massey Hall, and it says in partnership and with TD, and we do have the gobo there. I was thinking more so about the intrusiveness of having a person hand something out to you. For me, that was the sort of line.
Questions for anybody? No? Okay, I have another question for you then. Product placement. And so Madeline, I'm looking at you because some of your shows at the Sony Center, not the Fall for Dance shows,
Yeah.
but some of the other shows that have come in have had product placement in them.
Have we?
So what happens when you get a prepackaged show that comes into your venue that has product placement in it that might be in conflict with one of your venue sponsors?
I can't think of a situation where that has happened. Basically, any rental that comes in the door, we accept because they're paying our bills. So I can't think of. The Sony Center actually, we actually haven't had many conflicts. We don't have that many venue sponsors, to be honest. We have our F&B sponsors, and we guard those. And we also used to have a car. We have Rogers, and Sony, of course. So I can't think of an example of product placement, but certainly when shows come in the door with conflicting sponsors, the venue sponsors are supposed to supersede the show sponsors. I have to admit that that's not always the case. We do push our car out the door sometimes.
I would say, product placement is all in how you define it. For example, we have artists that are Steinway artists, so they would come with the Steinway piano, and I think that, because of the contextual link, is okay product placement. We did have one instance last year where all of our jaws dropped as one of the artists did an Arbonne pitch from the stage that we weren't expecting at all, and then sort of indicated that she would be downstairs in the lobby afterwards to take anybody's orders.
Wow.
So we certainly do not allow that sort of thing to happen. But I think what's also interesting was we had Shad was one of our Live at Massey Hall performers last year. And in the sort of confluence of events, we for that year had American Express come on as our sponsor for Live at Massey Hall. Now Shad, if you know him, one of the things that he talks about is he's very anti-credit card, and he thinks that he has this whole campaign to get kids off credit cards. So the fact that he all of a sudden was going to be on the stage at an event that was sponsored by a credit card, he was really conflicted with that. So we had to have that sort of open dialogue about how to manage that, and to think creatively about ways in which both could coexist. But it was something that just because of the way things fell into place, we didn't really think or make that connection. But those things, artists in particular, I think are leery of the fact that by having a corporate sponsorship or a brand association in the venue, that they're by default promoters or spokespeople for that particular brand. And so we find ourselves, because of the indie music world, as being very brand agnostic and afraid of brands, that we often have that conversation internally about how to manage that.
Yeah, and the other side of that as well, American Express, if they knew Shad's point of view, is probably not going to want their logo up there either at that time. So how was it resolved?
I think everyone just sort of, our biggest fear is that on the night of the performance, there would be some sort of speech from the stage from the artist that would be in conflict with the sponsor. That didn't happen, and we just had an open dialogue with Shad and his team about the sensitivity of it all, and they kind of understood it and got it, but he made sure that we knew that was something that was of concern to him.
Yeah, similar stuff with us. We've had artists who have questioned some of our sponsors, and we've been in negotiations with them. We had Grandmaster Flash talk about Puma from the stage, which was fine because that's what he did and we couldn't control it. But it's not something that we make a habit of.
It's a bit of a slippery slope with performers as well, because they do have merch. You provide merch tables, in performing arts venues, and artists, if they're a living artist, you know what? They've got a gallery somewhere. They're probably wanting to sell more pictures. So it is a bit of a slippery slope when they're, pitching their own product at the end of act, the first act.
It's
saying,
rare.
CDs for the
In
launch.
my experience, it's rare. I mean, people will, some people will say I have merch, but it's not been a huge problem for us. In terms of the artists.
It's very much our world where, that happens where usually it's CDs and t-shirts, but the other night I had Emily Claire Barlow in, and she's developed a whole line of nail polish based on sort of the colors in her world, and she was selling that at the merch table the other night. So I think artists, in some cases on the commercial side in particular, are thinking about how to leverage their brand across a whole series of different business lines, and I think it's becoming more and more common, and it's getting complex.
Is it just growing from the big, Rolling Stone concerts where they have, the $80 t-shirts and they have the full line of merch that's, run by another company completely and they just get licensing deals off it? Is that filtering down to the more indie artists having nail polish? I've never heard of that. I think it's quite fun.
It all depends on the artist. In some cases, yes. We did a couple of shows last year with Rheostatics around the music inspired by the Group of Seven, and we partnered with them. We made some t-shirts, they brought some records, and negotiated a deal between us and them, in part because we have a shop and they produce products based on all of the exhibitions that we do, and they produce product just for the Rheostatics shows. But it's negotiated on a case-by-case basis, on the same terms that we've really been talking about throughout the panel.
I mean, I think more so there's a whole, everyone is trying to maximize revenue in the game right now, and the latest thing to sort of hit our sector is third-party VIP events where you don't even know about them. So at the very last minute, you'll get word that, say, Vance Joy is coming through, and this third party has sold a VIP event to 50 people. That doesn't go into the gross of the show. It just goes to the company and eventually the artist. But they've promised you need to find a location for them. So in some cases, you have to go back and say, listen, we have actual hard costs associated with fulfilling this event, and they try to sneak it through as much as possible and try to make it your problem. So I think that's the world has changed. Everyone's trying to figure out how to make that extra little bit of a margin on all stuff that's coming through, and it's getting complicated.
And if you don't know about those partnerships ahead of time, you could be stuck without seats, especially if you've got a show that's sold out. And all of a sudden you're presented with 50 people. So
it's usually a top off to people who've already bought tickets, but they get an extra premium on top of that.
Yeah, for your show.
In some of our cases, the merch sales have actually helped us negotiate better artist deals, because the artists know they will sell so much merch that they're willing to do the show for a smaller fee. So.
Like the Doras and that type of thing.
Exactly. I'm thinking of the kid shows where, you can't fight with a 4-year-old who wants Dora. So in those cases, and also in some of our, we've done a show for a few years now called Final Fantasy, and it's clips of the video game accompanied by a live orchestra, and they sell very expensive merch. They sell the video games, which are, I don't know what they cost. They're $100. I mean, we're not talking.
Don't look at me.
Yeah. I don't know either. We're not talking about T-shirts and CDs, and so they make a lot of money off it, and the show is worth it.
Thank you all for sharing your opinions today. Sean, Chris, Madeline. And you're going to be around for the next little bit as we have a mix and mingle and talk. So if any of you do have questions, by all means.